Chapter 1. The Scented Invitation. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of 21A Baker Street, casting long golden shafts across the Persian carpet. The flat was unusually still, save for the faint rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the soft scratch of a quill against heavy cream paper. Hercule Poirot sat at his writing table, pince-nez perched memorably upon his nose, as he dipped the quill into ink and composed a polite note to Captain Hastings. Yet, even as he wrote, his little grey cells stirred restlessly. For within the scented letter on his desk lay the promise of a new puzzle, and a fragrance that stirred memories both sweet and sinister. A gentle rap sounded at the door. "Monsieur Poirot, a visitor requests your presence," announced the landlady, Mrs. Hudson, her voice carrying both respect and a hint of curiosity. Poirot laid down his quill and rose, brushing a silver-tipped cane against the hem of his suit. "Merci, madame. Show our guest in, s'il vous plaît." He smoothed his crisp collar and adjusted his immaculate cravat, allowing himself a small smile of anticipation. A scent of lavender drifted faintly through the doorway, an unexpected fragrance in the musty hallway. Mrs. Hudson returned moments later, ushering in a slender figure swathed in a cream wool cape. The woman's hood lay back, revealing auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper. With an elegant flourish, she removed her gloves and presented a slender envelope sealed with deep indigo wax. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and tremulous, "I beg your assistance in a matter most unusual and most urgent." At that, she extended the envelope. "The writer claims to have used a quill dipped in a rare perfume, and only your extraordinary skills, both of detection and of deduction, can unravel the truth concealed by its scented ink." Poirot inclined his head with polite interest. "Madam," he prompted. The woman took a breath and said, "My name is Celeste Montague." Her fine features bore the ghost of a tremor. "I am the private secretary to Lord Eversham. He is to host a gathering tomorrow evening at Eversham, Manor, to unveil a manuscript of his late father. The invitation arrived scented with a rare jasmine oil, and signed by a quill of antique design. But my lord fears that someone has tampered with both the ink and the message, and that danger lurks beneath." Poirot's moustaches twitched in delight. "Très intéressant. A scented quill, you say, and a family gathering with undercurrents of fear?" He glanced at the envelope. "May I?" Celeste shook her head slightly. "I feared you might suspect me, but I assure you I only shield my employer's reputation. This letter, it carries the fragrance of someone long dead." She pressed the envelope into his hand. "My lord's father collected rare perfumes. He was said to test them on special parchment, and to sign only with that ink. Lord Eversham believes the quill is his father's own, and that something more than a message was written with it." Poirot held the envelope to his nose, inhaling the subtle jasmine mingled with a metallic undertone. He closed his eyes briefly, savouring the complexity. "The scent is exquisite, yet also reminiscent of musk. Perhaps a counterfeit blend, crafted to mislead." He handed it back. "We must visit Eversham Manor at once. Will you accompany me?" Celeste's eyes brightened with relief. "If you please, Monsieur Poirot, my lord awaits your counsel." The drive to Eversham Manor took them through London's winding streets into the quiet Surrey countryside, where hedgerows bristled with early spring buds. Celeste sat opposite Poirot in the carriage, her gloved hands twisting a pale handkerchief. "Lord Eversham is a gentleman of advanced years," she explained. "He adores his father's manuscripts and perfumes. But since the events of last evening, he has scarcely slept. The unveiling of the memoirs of Sir Reginald Eversham is tomorrow at dusk. Already whispers circulate of family discord, and of a possible betrayal." Poirot nodded, eyes shimmering behind the lenses of his spectacles. Family secrets often carry the strongest scent of danger. He tapped his cane lightly. And if someone wished to sabotage the occasion, tampering with the invitation would be the most subtle method. Not a bullet, but a befouled pen. He allowed himself a slight chuckle. Ah, such is the craft of the criminal mind. They arrived before the manor's wrought-iron gates, beyond which a gravel drive wound upward through ancient oaks. Eversham Manor itself stood like a fortress of soft grey stone, battlements and turrets softened by ivy. As the carriage rolled onto the terrace, a butler in deep livery stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Celeste, Lord Eversham awaits you in the library." He bowed and opened the door. Inside the library was a grand chamber of dark oak shelves and plush armchairs. A fire glowed in a marble hearth, and dozens of leather-bound volumes sparkled under lamplight. At a desk by the window sat an elderly gentleman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He rose unsteadily as they entered. "Monsieur Poirot," he said hoarsely, voice cracked by age and worry, "I thank you for coming so swiftly." He gestured to the chair opposite. "You may examine the letter." Poirot placed the envelope upon the desk and gently prized it open. Inside, a single sheet of parchment lay, its edges scented through and through by the jasmine-jarring ink. He drew it out, studying the writing. A bold copperplate flourish, unmistakably vintage. He held the page aloft to the light, noting how the ink shimmered and flaked slightly. "The paper itself is of mid-19th century manufacture," he observed, "and yet the handwriting, it is not precisely your father's." He turned to Lord Eversham. "May I see an original sample of Sir Reginald's signature?" The lord held out a leather portfolio and withdrew a folded letter from decades earlier, bearing an identical flourish. Poirot compared the loops of the capital R and found subtle differences. The new signature strokes were more deliberate, less fluid, and the scent more pungent. He inhaled again. Madame Celeste was correct. This is a counterfeit likeness. Meticulously copied but flawed in rhythm and scent. Lord Eversham's face reddened. My poor father! To think his quill is used in such treachery. His voice broke. Celeste stepped forward. My lord, who among your acquaintances would wish to prevent the unveiling? Your children, your godson, Mr. Fairchild, perhaps, or the publishers, who stand to profit by delay. Poirot tapped his chin. We must consider motive, method, and opportunity. Someone had access to your father's scented archive, and knowledge of his quill's mechanism. Personally, I suspect someone within this house. He turned and fixed his gaze on the butler who had led them in. You, monsieur, hold the keys to this library, both literal and in terms of trust. Where were you last evening at 8 o'clock? The butler bowed. In the drawing-room, sir, overseeing the guest's departure. I did not enter the library." Poirot's eyes flicked to the closed door. Yet this letter was scented by the jar kept upon this very desk. He tapped the writing surface. Someone who knows the jar's hiding place could inhale more than fragrance. They could study its composition and replicate it. He held up the forged letter. The heavier notes of musk betray a substitution, an attempt to mask the jasmine in favour of something more potent. Lord Eversham's eyes narrowed. My godson, James Fairchild, is a chemist of some renown. He claims to have studied exotic perfumes in Grasse. He turned to Celeste. He arrived only yesterday. Poirot inclined his head. He might have sought to delay the unveiling, perhaps to gain favour with the publishers or to manipulate the sale of the memoirs. He paused. Madame Celeste, you will show me to his quarters? We must confront him with the evidence of scent and signature. Celeste bowed her head. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. She led the way back through the corridor, where tapestries depicted hunting scenes, now shadowed by doubt. As they passed beneath a row of family portraits, the air seemed to grow heavier with expectation. They arrived outside a panelled bedroom door. Celeste knocked. A muffled voice answered, Enter. Inside, James Fairchild stood at a dressing table, his lab coat dusted with violet powder. He turned, surprise flashing across his handsome features. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Celeste, what is the meaning of this? Poirot stepped forward, extending the forged letter. A simple question, monsieur. Did you craft this invitation? And if so, why? Fairchild's hand went to the lapel of his coat, revealing a small vial of amber liquid. I admit I experimented with a scented blend. His voice quavered. My godfather invited me to join his perfume collection, to preserve his father's legacy. But the ancient jar was empty, and I feared the unveiling would be dull without the authentic scent. So I prepared a mixture of jasmine and musk to ensure the room glowed with fragrance. I never intended danger. Poirot studied the vial. Its contents matched the forged scent. He nodded. Your motive was aesthetic, not malicious. Yet the forgery endangered both you and your godfather. Had the false ink caused a reaction or an allergic response, catastrophe could follow. Fairchild's shoulders slumped. I realize that now. I only wanted to honour him. Poirot closed his eyes, briefly. In truth, the only danger lay in deception. You will rectify this by delivering a truthful apology, and by retrieving the genuine quill from the archives to sign each invitation anew. Fairchild bowed. I will, Monsieur Poirot. Thank you for your understanding. Poirot turned to Celeste. And you, mademoiselle, will ensure the new invitations bear the genuine signature, and no counterfeit scent. She nodded. I will attend to it. At once. Back in the library, the butler quietly replaced the forged parchment with a fresh set of ivory invitations. Poirot watched with satisfaction as Celeste dipped the antique quill into jasmine oil and glided across the paper. He inhaled the true fragrance, a clean, luminous scent that seemed to promise both revelation and harmony. Lord Eversham approached with trembling gratitude. You have saved my father's memory, and my family's honour, Monsieur Poirot. The detective bowed. It was the scent of truth, my lord, that guided me. A false aroma may disguise a crime, but it cannot suppress the heart's own fragrance. He tapped his nose. And now, mon ami, your gathering shall proceed with authenticity restored. As they left Eversham Manor beneath the first stars, of early evening, Poirot allowed himself a gentle smile. The scent of jasmine remained faint upon the breeze, a perfumed echo of the puzzle solved. And so, the first chapter of Hercule Poirot and the Case of the Scented Quill drew to its close, setting the stage for 14 more chapters of intrigue, deduction, and the unerring logic of the world's greatest detective. Chapter 2. The Unveiling at Eversham Manor. The next afternoon, a pale sun drifted through high clouds as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings descended from their carriage onto the gravelled forecourt of Eversham Manor. The great house, built of pale Portland stone, stood quietly beneath a canopy of ancient oaks, their branches yet bare from winter's chill. A light breeze carried the heady notes of jasmine from the walled garden, mingling unexpectedly with the distant hum of activity as servants prepared for the evening's event. Poirot paused at the foot of the steps, his little grey cells already at work. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, "the subtle transformation of this place. Where once there was only solemn expectation, now there is a delicate air of celebration. Yet beneath the perfumed crispness lies tension, electric and unspoken." Hastings surveyed the scene. "I see gentlemen in frock coats conferring in low voices, ladies in silk gowns descending the staircase with practised poise, and Lord Eversham himself standing before the front door, wrapped in anxious thought." Poirot nodded. "Let us join him, mon ami." They ascended the steps where Lord Eversham waited, leaning on a silver-topped cane. His blue eyes brightened at their approach. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I thank you for arriving early. You will witness the unveiling of my late father's memoirs." Celeste Montague emerged to greet them, her expression warm despite nervous tension. She curtsied to Hastings, then offered her arm to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, if you will follow me to the library, where the guests shall assemble." They passed through a pair of carved oak doors into a broad hallway, lined with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their progress. As they crossed the hall, a discreet commotion caught Hastings's attention. James Fairchild, the chemist godson, was arguing in a low voice with the butler, his face flushed with impatience. "They appear to dispute something," Hastings observed. Poirot inclined a single brow. "All part of the tapestry. Let us proceed." In the library, a lofty chamber hung with tapestries depicting pastoral scenes. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle facing a broad desk. On that desk lay the richly bound volume of Sir Reginald's memoirs, its crimson leather gleaming under gaslight, alongside an inkstand, quill, and the familiar jasmine jar. A perfumed candle stood at one corner, the flame flickering gently. Guests numbering perhaps 20 filtered in, publishers in sober suits, aristocrats in morning dress, and a scattering of literary critics whose sharp eyes darted from one feature to the next. All paused as Poirot and Hastings entered, murmuring in attentive hush. Lady Inglewood, a matron of severe dignity, approached Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you slept well after your evening's labours." Her tone was cordial, but contained a trace of cynical amusement. Poirot inclined his head with deference. "Madame, my rest was complete. The night's forgery was a matter of perfume more than ink." He offered her a small bow. She allowed a thin smile before gliding away to her seat. Hastings leaned in. "Lady Inglewood is notorious for her acerbic reviews. If any scandal emerges tonight, her pen will be swift to capture it." Poirot sipped the air, inhaling jasmine once more. "We must guard against her barbs, Hastings. But first, my lord," he turned to Lord Eversham, who had advanced to the desk. "Shall we begin the ceremony?" Lord Eversham tapped his cane lightly. "Yes, thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I shall address the assembly." He cleared his throat, voice trembling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this most personal of gatherings, the first public reading of my father's memoirs. He devoted his life to his country and to his fragrances. Tonight we honour his memory. Monsieur Poirot, will you do me the great honour of reading the opening passage?" A ripple of polite applause greeted Poirot as he stepped forward. He lifted the volume with care and opened it to the first page. The guests leaned forward. At a nod from Eversham, Celeste extinguished the perfumed candle, leaving only the quill and inkstand as focus. A hush fell, broken only by the soft rustle of skirts and the faint scratch of quill upon paper. Poirot had dipped his own pen to begin reading. He read, "In the year of our Lord 1867, I embarked upon a journey across the Levant, seeking to gather the finest essences of jasmine and rose. It was there, amidst the orchards of Damascus, that I first encountered the perfume which would guide my life's work." His rich baritone carried the words to every corner of the chamber. As he spoke, faces softened, transported by the vivid recollections. When he concluded the opening paragraph, a quiet murmur of admiration rippled through the crowd. But just as Poirot prepared to continue, a sudden click echoed from the back of the room. The sound of a hidden latch released. Several guests turned, startled, as the panelling along one wall slid silently aside, revealing a narrow alcove. Inside stood a single figure, the publisher, Mr. Hadrell, pale-faced and clutching a satchel. Poirot paused mid-sentence, quill suspended. The guests gasped. Lord Eversham's cane clicked against the floor as he hurried forward. "What? Mr. Hadrell, what are you doing there?" Hadrell's voice trembled. "Forgive me, my lord. Forgive me, Monsieur Poirot. I came to retrieve the original manuscript pages that my firm holds, lest they be stolen." He thrust the satchel forward. "I feared the memoirs themselves would vanish, and I confess I did not trust the scent alone to secure them." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "You, sir, believed the alcove would protect your pages." He glanced around. The alcove's floor was lined with dustless tiles. A small lock, affixed to the inner edge of the panel, confirmed that it had been sealed until that moment. A murmur rose. The publisher's confession, prompted by fear of theft, echoed the earlier tampering. Hastings stepped toward Hadrell. "Sir, you might have asked for assistance rather than conduct a clandestine raid." Hadrell swallowed and nodded. I was afraid." Lord Eversham retrieved the satchel, checking its contents. "They are here. Thank you, Mr. Hadrell. Pray, remain seated." He turned to Poirot. "Monsieur, your reading. Shall we resume?" Poirot inclined his head. "If you will forgive the interruption, my lord." He replaced the quill and took a breath. Perhaps we shall adjourn for brief refreshments, so that tempers and appetites alike may quell. The owners of the apricot jam and delicate biscuits stationed by the doorway accordingly advanced, and the guests gratefully dispersed, leaving the memoirs upon the desk. In the adjacent morning room, a spread of tea, scones, and finger sandwiches awaited. The company formed clusters once more. Lord Eversham and Celeste by the fireplace, Lady Inglewood and Mr. Fairchild near the lace-curtained window, and Poirot and Hastings beneath a floral painting of jasmine blossoms. Lord Eversham poured himself a cup, hands unsteady. "Monsieur, I fear my gathering has become a pantomime of suspicion." He pressed his lips together. "My father's memoirs meant to unite, yet already they have sown discord." Poirot set down his cup. "My lord, the memoirs will yet charm this company, but human nature, alas, delights in intrigue." He tapped Hastings's arm. "Hastings, have you noted the presence of Mr. Fairchild's chemical satchel? He entered this room with it, did he not?" Hastings nodded. "Yes, and he seems more at ease now that the publisher is above suspicion." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we turn our attention to his devices." He rose and crossed to the window, where Fairchild examined the view. Poirot cleared his throat. Fairchild turned, hat in hand. "Monsieur Poirot, do you require another demonstration of scent?" Poirot smiled. "Mon ami, merely a question. Your work with jasmine fragments. How many samples have you tested this afternoon?" Fairchild hesitated. "Several, but none with the intensity of the original." His gaze flickered. "I collected some from the garden, too." Poirot held a single-gloved finger aloft. "If you entered the alcove and exposed those pages, you may also have inspected my refreshments. Did you taste anything unusual?" Fairchild's cheeks reddened. "I felt a slight bitterness in the lemon curd." Poirot nodded. "A bitter alkaloid, one which, when mixed with jasmine, intensifies the aroma but darkens the tincture. Why introduce such a compound?" Fairchild's shoulders slumped. I wished to enhance the fragrance when we adjourned to the alcove. I thought the memoirs would deserve a signature scent to accompany their reading." He shook his head. "I did not mean ill." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Alcove, you say?" Hastings frowned. "Are you suggesting Fairchild conspired with Hadril to test that space as a secure repository, using taste to gauge evaporation rates of scent?" Poirot turned to Lord Eversham. "Your godson and your publisher both sought to protect the memoirs by trial, one by manuscript, one by scent." He paced slowly. "Both acts, though misguided, share motive, fear of loss. Neither meant harm, yet each acted clandestinely." He stopped by the table. "And so, my lord, the memoirs remain safe upon your desk in plain sight, and tonight's reading may continue with trust restored." Lord Eversham exhaled, relief softening his features. "You have bridged our suspicions, Monsieur Poirot. I thank you." He turned to Fairchild and Hadril. "And you, my friends, must know that open dialogue serves better than private panics." Both men bowed deeply. Poirot returned to his seat by Hastings. "Now, mon ami, shall we reconvene the assembly? The memoirs await your voice." Hastings offered his arm. "Indeed, and I promise no more interruptions." They returned to the library where chairs had been rearranged in neat rows. Lord Eversham assumed his place behind the desk once more, and beckoned Poirot forward. Guests settled, Celeste perched beside the fireplace with a discreet smile. Poirot opened the book and began to read the next chapter of Sir Reginald's memoirs, his voice steady and assured. Upon my return to England in the autumn of 1868, I found that the essence of jasmine we so prized had altered. The weather, the soil, the soul of the blossom itself had changed. I resolved to capture its final bloom in a tincture that would preserve its character for posterity. As the narrative unfurled, listeners leaned forward, enraptured by the vivid recollections of distant gardens and warm bazaars. When Poirot concluded his second section, a hush fell, this time genuine reverence rather than apprehension. Musings of conspiracies and clandestine traps melted away under the soft glow of remembered fragrance. Lord Eversham closed the book and rose, his voice strong. Let this evening conclude with gratitude for the past and hope for the future. He paused, offering a final bow to Poirot. Mon cher ami, you have guided us through scent and script with impeccable grace. Poirot inclined his head and allowed himself a small, contented smile. It is the triumph of truth, my lord, and the finest perfume of all. Thus, as gaslights dimmed and sofas filled with convivial guests, the second chapter of Hercule Poirot and the Case of the Scented Quill drew to a close, its tapestry enriched by revelations of motive, moments of high drama, and the enduring synergy of ink and aroma that only the world's greatest detective could so deftly unravel. Chapter 3. The Theft of the Scented Quill. The morning after the grand reading, Eversham Manor lay quiet beneath a pale November sky. A thin mist clung to the buttressed walls, and the scent of jasmine, lingering from the Unveiling, had faded to a ghostly whisper. Within the panelled sanctuary of Celeste Montague's private office, the newly authenticated quill rested upon a velvet-lined tray beside the jasmine jar, as if awaiting daily veneration. Celeste sat at her writing desk, the early sun glinting off her teacup, and made a series of careful notations in a ledger of invitations, her brow furrowed in concentration. A sharp knock at the door startled her. "Enter!" she called, and Mrs. Hudson's familiar figure appeared in the doorway. "Madame Celeste," Mrs. Hudson said breathlessly, I don't wish to alarm you, but the quill, it's gone." Celeste's hand flew to her heart. "Gone? What do you mean?" She pushed back from the desk and swept the tray into view. Empty. Her eyes widened. "Impossible! I placed it here this morning after our discussion with Monsieur Poirot. No one else has entered this room." Mrs. Hudson wrung her handkerchief. "I can swear I saw it at 10. Then, when I returned after attending to the lower salons, it was no longer here. The ledger lies undisturbed, but the quill and the silver nibber vanished." A sudden crisis seized Celeste's composure. She bowed her head. "Fetch Monsieur Poirot at once, and seal this room. No one in or out without my knowledge." Mrs. Hudson curtsied and departed on swift feet, leaving Celeste to pace the marquetry floor like a caged creature. Within the hour, Hercule Poirot arrived, accompanied by Captain Hastings and the anxious Lord Eversham. Celeste greeted them in the doorway, her gloves clenched. "Monsieur Poirot, the quill has been stolen," she whispered. "The very tool by which my lord's invitations were crafted, and by which we authenticated the memoirs." Poirot's black eyes gleamed. "Ah, the scented quill, a most precious instrument. Fear not, mademoiselle, we shall recover it." He removed his gloves and knelt before the tray. With meticulous care, he examined the velvet lining and the surrounding floorboards. Hastings bent to peer as well. "Any footprints?" he asked. Poirot shook his head. "None visible, yet see here." He drew a small magnifying glass and focused on the corner of the tray. A single pale eyelash and a faint smear of lavender oil, a woman's lash, and the tang of lavender, distinct from the jasmine. Our culprit wore lavender-scented perfume, no doubt to mask the jasmine's residue. He rose, smoothing his moustaches. "My lord, whom among your guests or staff favours lavender?" Lord Eversham ran a hand through his silver hair. "My sister-in-law, Lady Inglewood, favours lavender bath salts, and my aunt, Lady Fairchild, you know, James's mother, wore lavender eau de cologne." He glanced anxiously at Hastings, but they were not present in this wing after breakfast. Poirot nodded. "Yet both have means. But which had opportunity?" He turned to Celeste. "Mademoiselle, when did you last use this quill?" Celeste clasped her gloves. "Just before my morning audience, around 9 o'clock. I then locked the office and left to fetch Monsieur Poirot's morning post." Hastings frowned. "And no one entered until Mrs. Hudson's discovery at 11. Celeste shook her head. "No one." Poirot tapped his cane. "Then the culprit possessed a key, either Mrs. Hudson's master key or your own." He looked to Lord Eversham. "May I see your key ring?" Inside the library, Eversham produced a small silver ring, 2 brass keys, one labelled Office, the other Cellar. Poirot examined them. The office key bore fresh scratches, newly filed. He held them to the light and rotated them. "And the warding of your office lock is of 12 wards. This key slips into 10. Someone has tampered with the lock internally to admit a false key, then filed down a duplicate." Lord Eversham's face paled. "But who?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "We have 2 suspects, one with lavender scent and one with intimate knowledge of the lock. Both Lady Inglewood and Lady Fairchild meet the first criterion, yet only one with access to the lock mechanism. Who among them has a fondness for tinkering?" He paused. "James Fairchild, the chemist, has spoken of his curiosity with locks. He once showed me his home's antique ironwork." Hastings's eyebrows rose. "Are you suggesting James orchestrated this?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. He had the technical skill to modify a ward, and the motive, a desire to possess the quill itself, a rare artifact to showcase in his private collection of perfumed instruments. He turned to Fairchild, who had followed them into the library upon hearing the commotion. Fairchild stood by the door, his chemist's satchel slung across one shoulder. At Poirot's charge, he raised his gloved hands. "Monsieur, I admit I admired the quill's craftsmanship, but never did I think to steal it." He glanced nervously at the keyring. I only borrowed your office key to fetch a letter I left behind. I did not intend to intrude upon your quill." Poirot's eyebrows twitched. A convenient slip of intent, no doubt. He walked slowly around Fairchild, studying his coat. Note that the sleeve is singed at the cuff, perhaps from filing metal. Hastings leaned forward. By Jove, Poirot, you may be right. And what of the lavender? Fairchild's mother, a famous lavender grower, sent him samples yesterday. Fairchild's shoulders sagged. Yes, but I did not apply it here. I took only a brief sniff to carry with me. He sniffed his cuff irritably. I did not mean to leave a trace upon your tray. Poirot flicked his magnifier at the corner of the desk. Forgive me, monsieur, but the lavender under your nails matches the residue upon this velvet, where your nail scraped against its lining. He held up Fairchild's hand. And upon this, too. Fairchild stared in dismay. Poirot held up a hand. No more, please. Now, return the quill. He reached into Celeste's salon bag and produced a small steel trap, an ingenious device to catch any thief reaching into the tray. Its jaws locked around the quill's shaft. When I suspected foul play, I installed this clever contraption. Our culprit's impatience sets the trap. Fairchild faltered, eyes wide. You set a trap. Poirot inclined. One must prepare for deception. Madam, he said to Celeste, ensure this quill is restored to its jar under lock and key. No more temptations. Celeste exhaled and nodded. Lord Eversham stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Fairchild's shoulder. James, we value your skill, but you must understand the weight of trust. Return the quill, and let us forgive a moment's folly. Fairchild bowed his head and handed over the quill, its nib dulled by haste. Celeste lifted the tray and gently set the quill into its velvet cradle. She locked the office door, sliding the true key into its ring. No more unauthorized visitors, she vowed. Poirot straightened his jacket and addressed the small gathering. Let this serve as a lesson, that even the most exquisite instrument can tempt the cleverest mind. Yet the smallest trace, an eyelash, a scent, a file mark, reveals the guilty heart, and so the case of the scented quill grows ever more intricate. He tapped his cane, but let us hope the quill's fragrance now returns to incense, not intrigue. As a hush fell, the assembled thanked Poirot and Hastings, returning to their various duties. Fairchild stood sheepishly by a window, while Celeste arranged the quill's return with trembling hands, and Poirot, observing the gentle restoration of order, allowed himself the merest hint of a satisfied smile. The mystery, for now at least, had been untangled by the unerring power of scent and logic intertwined. Chapter 4. The Poisoned Manuscript. The grand dining hall of Eversham Manor glittered with crystal and silver as the evening guests took their seats beneath a vaulted ceiling hung with ancestral lanterns. A long table, set with starched linens and porcelain chargers, stretched between two gilded marble fireplaces. Above these hearths, portraits of Sir Reginald Eversham surveyed the assembly, their eyes seeming to follow the preparations as footmen placed tureens of consommé and platters of roast pheasant before each pair of diners. Monsieur Hercule Poirot sat at one end of the table beside Captain Hastings, whose appetite for the evening's fare was tempered by curiosity. Opposite them, Lord Eversham presided with quiet dignity. Celeste Montague to his right, her hands folded upon her lap, powdering her palms with delicate lavender-scented talcum. To his left, Lady Inglewood, draped in violet silk, conversed with Mr. Hadrell, the publisher. At intervals, James Fairchild hovered near his godfather's elbow, his chemist's satchel secured beneath the tablecloth. Poirot observed the room with the intensity of a hawk. He noticed how Lady Fairchild, James's mother, watched the guests from a side alcove, her expression veiled by a fan scented with rose. He noted the butler's crisp movements as he poured champagne, the matronly housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, ensuring each guest's napkin was properly folded. All appeared in order, yet to Poirot's little grey cells, unease flickered. "Mon ami," Hastings whispered, leaning toward Poirot as the first course was served. "Do you sense something amiss?" Poirot raised a single brow. "Hastings, the air is rich with perfumes, jasmine, lavender, rose, but beneath them lies a scent colder still." He paused as a footman set down a bowl of consommé before Lady Inglewood. "Observe how she inhales that glass of wine as if seeking a missing aroma, yet she is purportedly at ease." Before Hastings could reply, Lady Inglewood lifted her spoon to her lips, but paused, her eyes widening in alarm. She set the spoon down with a trembling hand, her violet gloves brushing the edge of the bowl. My dear Lord Eversham," she gasped, voice trembling. "There is a bitterness, an acrid tang I cannot swallow." A hush fell. Lord Eversham rose, setting aside his napkin. "Madam, are you unwell?" Lady Inglewood clutched her throat, her eyes darting, then collapsed forward onto the table, the bowl of consommé shattering as it struck the damask cloth. Chaos erupted. Hastings lunged to her side, gently cradling her as she moaned. "Good heavens, she's fainted!" he cried. Celeste sprang up, pressing a handkerchief to Lady Inglewood's lips. "Has someone called for the doctor?" Poirot rose, tapping, his cane against the floor. "Cover that room at once. No one may enter or leave until I have spoken with each guest." He strode to the head of the table and raised a gloved hand. "Gentlemen, ladies, remain calm. Lady Inglewood shall receive proper care, but I must inquire of the contents of this dinner. Bring me the consommé bowl and the wine-glass she held." He indicated 2 footmen, who obeyed in hushed urgency. Within moments, Hastings had fetched the master physician of the county, Dr. Lawson, who knelt beside Lady Inglewood and checked her pulse. She lay still, lips parted, while a faint lavender haze of fragrance drifted above the table. Dr. Lawson straightened. "She is faint and mildly convulsed. I suspect poisoning, though the cause is unclear. Better carry her to the library." Carried by 2 servants, Lady Inglewood was borne from the hall. Dr. Lawson followed, instructing Celeste to fetch brandy. Poirot watched the procession, then turned to Hastings. "There, mon ami, we have our crime, a poisoned consommé. But who amongst us introduced the toxin, and by what means?" Hastings surveyed the scattered remains. Consommé dripped from the table's edge, and the bowl lay cracked upon the polished floor. "There are footprints in the spill, small and slippered." He bent to inspect. "Am I right to think those are Lady Fairchild's slippers?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed. But she remained in the alcove. She could not have approached without detection. We must examine the bowl itself." He beckoned a footman. Bring me the bowl used by Lady Inglewood." The footman retrieved the cracked porcelain and handed it to Poirot, who rotated it under the lantern glow. "Note the residue clinging to this rim." He produced a slender glass stirring rod from his coat pocket and scraped a drop of consommé onto a white saucer. With gentle breath, he sniffed, his brow knit. A faint aroma of almond, bitter almond, that is the signature of cyanide. A collective gasp ran through the remaining guests. Lord Eversham's face blanched. Cyanide! Poisoned by a connoisseur of perfumes? Poirot's smile was wry. "Ah, but perfumes can mask many an evil. Now, I must ask you all to remain here until I have spoken with each in turn." He turned to the butler. "At once, instruct Mrs. Hudson to summon servants for tea here, and keep them within hearing. No one may retire to private chambers." As the butler bowed and left to relay orders, Hastings whispered, "Poirot, you must question the guests. Anyone's hands could have slipped poison into the pot." Poirot paced slowly, eyes alight. "We begin with those closest to the consommé. Who ladled the first bowl?" Hastings raised a hand. "The steward, Mr. Flanders." Poirot nodded. "Let us speak with him." They approached Flanders, a portly man with a nervous tic, standing by the sideboard. His white gloves were immaculate, though his knuckles trembled. Poirot addressed him gently. "Monsieur Flanders, did you serve the consommé to Lady Inglewood yourself?" Flanders swallowed. Yes, monsieur. I ladled the soup and delivered it to table." Poirot extended his gloved hand. "May I see your gloves?" Flanders removed them, revealing faint discoloration on his fingertips. Poirot sniffed. "A trace of bitterness and lavender. You must have tasted for seasoning." Flanders blinked. I always check for seasoning, but only onion and salt." He glanced around. "I did not know the poison was there." Poirot pocketed the gloves. "Thank you. Remain close at hand." They moved on. Next, Poirot intercepted James Fairchild, who stood near the flickering hearth, his chemist's satchel now slung across his back. Poirot inclined. "Monsieur Fairchild, you handled the quill with me earlier, yet I see you have changed gloves." Fairchild lifted a more fresh pair. "The old ones became soiled. I replaced them." Poirot traced a fingertip along the satchel's clasp. "Your satchel. Permit me." Fairchild nodded. Poirot opened it, revealing vials of perfume and powdered compounds. Jasmine, lavender, rose, and a small unlabeled vial. He lifted it and sniffed. Bitter almond. He held it aloft. This contained cyanide. Fairchild paled. I use cyanide to test solubility of new fragrances," he protested. "I would never poison anyone." Poirot's gaze was calm but firm. "Yet you had both means and opportunity. You might have introduced a trace into the consommé when you sampled it for scent." Fairchild shook his head. "It was in my bag. I brought it only to demonstrate to Lord Eversham how the bitterness intensifies jasmine. I did not remove it from its vial." Poirot pocketed the vial. "We shall test that." He turned away. Lady Fairchild entered next, her fan fluttering, rose perfume heavy on the air. Poirot bowed. "Madame, you offered Lady Inglewood a glass of claret before dinner, did you not?" She nodded. "Yes, to whet her appetite. She declined, though." Poirot observed her fan, its lace stained with tiny pink spots. "May I see your fan and your gloves?" She extended both. Poirot sniffed a glove. "Rose, yes, but no almond." He dropped them. "Thank you." The succession of interviews revealed each guest had an alibi, save one. Lady Inglewood's own napkin, used to dab her lips as she collapsed, now lay upon an adjacent chair, its corner stained with consommé. Poirot retrieved it with a swiftness that drew startled looks. He unfolded the corner and pressed it to his nose. A faint trace of lavender-tipped bitterness hung upon the cloth. He folded it carefully and raised his head. "My lords, ladies, all must listen." He cleared his throat. The poison was introduced not at the tureen, nor in Fairchild's demonstration, nor by Lady Fairchild's claret. It was brought by an insider, someone who scented the consommé pot itself. He gestured toward the hearth. "Recall that I lit no scented candle at dinner, yet I detect lavender upon the bowl, bitter almond in the consommé, and jasmine naught but a memory." He paused, eyes sweeping the assembly. "The culprit is the person whose perfume accords with all three. Lavender to mask, jasmine to recall, bitter almond to kill." He held up a small card with printed names encircling the one. "Celeste Montague." A gasp rose. Celeste stepped back, shock on her face. "Monsieur Poirot, me? I would never." Poirot advanced. "You prepared the consommé seasoning this morning when you visited the kitchens." She shook her head, voice quavering. I arranged for the chef to use the jasmine extract in the stock, but after the stock was ladled, I was alone in the pastry kitchen. I tested a new lavender glaze for the petits fours, and I carried a teaspoon back through the pantry, resting upon this bowl." She pointed to the cracked tureen. I must have dropped a trace of lavender, but I did not intend." Poirot's hand raised. "No, mademoiselle, you intended far more." He produced Lady Inglewood's napkin. "The lavender upon this cloth matches precisely the glaze you tested. Only you had both opportunity to introduce it and knowledge to disguise the poison's true nature." Celeste's lips trembled. "No, I never touched the consommé." Poirot held out the napkin. "No, yet this lavender-laced cyanide on my gloved fingertip from this napkin proves otherwise." He unwrapped the rose-scented parasol beside her. "Even this parasol's handle is smudged with bitter almond." Celeste sobbed. I poisoned her, not to kill, only to warn her. She intended to expose breaches in my lord's will. She threatened to publicize family scandals. I only wished to frighten her into silence." Hastings stared. "A warning with poison?" Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Mademoiselle Montague, your fear betrayed you into crime. You used your knowledge of perfumes to hateful effect." He pinned her with his steel gaze. "You will remain here until the servants fetch the constable." As servants hurried to obey, Celeste collapsed into a chair, trembling. Lord Eversham looked on in horrified silence. Poirot straightened his waistcoat. Thus, in the poisoned consommé, so delicately spiced, lies the truth. That scent can evoke memory, disguise motive, and conceal murder. He tapped his nose. And now the scented quill has felled its second victim, though one lucky to survive. He stood back, surveying the assembled guests rendered mute by shock. Let this serve as a reminder, mes amis. The sweetest aroma may mask the deadliest of poisons. Thus closed the 4th chapter of Hercule Poirot and the case of the scented quill, where flavours become fatal, perfumes conceal peril, and the unerring logic of the world's greatest detective shines a light through every poisoned veil. Chapter 5. The Vanishing Chapter. The dawn sun shone weakly through the tall mullioned windows of the Eversham library, casting pale rectangles of light across the carpet. The tragedy of Lady Inglewood's poisoning the night before still hung heavy in the air, yet life at Eversham Manor had resumed its quiet routine. In the centre of the room, Lord Eversham stood over his father's memoirs, brows furrowed in disbelief. The crimson volume lay open upon the desk, but one of the chapters, chapter 7, had been cut cleanly from its binding and stolen away. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, summoned at once by Celeste Montague, circled the desk, his little grey cells whirring. Mon Dieu! He exclaimed softly. A missing chapter, and so neatly excised that no trace of torn paper remains. Our criminal now strikes at text instead of tincture. He straightened and addressed Lord Eversham. My lord, when did you first notice the absence? Lord Eversham placed a trembling hand upon the desk. This morning, when I went to review Sir Reginald's instructions for tonight's second reading. I turned to chapter 7, only to find the empty stub of its preceding page. He waved a gloved hand at the blank space between chapters Adeus. 6 and 8. I thought at first the pages had been misplaced, but the binding is tight. Someone removed that chapter deliberately. Captain Hastings bent to inspect the binding. Remarkable craftsmanship, no jagged edges. This was done with a razor or a slender blade. He straightened. And who had access to the library overnight? Celeste clasped her hands. Only the housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, and myself, until midnight, when the doors were locked. Then Mr. Flanders held the keys for the night watch. Poirot raised a hand. And the watchman. Did he hear anything? Lord Eversham shook his head. He reported no disturbance. No voices, no footsteps. Only the usual cracking of the hearth. Poirot tapped his cane. Then our culprit must be one of the privileged few, one accustomed to the quiet of these halls. But first, let us examine what has been stolen. He drew a white card from his waistcoat pocket. Mademoiselle, would you read me aloud the title of chapter 7, as printed in the table of contents? Celeste nodded and read. Chapter 7. The Unveiled Secret of the Blackened Ink. Indeed, Poirot murmured, a tantalizing title, and yet the text could embarrass someone or exonerate another. He motioned to Lord Eversham. My lord, what was the chapter's subject? Lord Eversham exhaled. It recounts my father's final years in Paris. He discovered a forgery ring operating within the perfume houses, employing counterfeit scents and poisoned baselines. He named names, one of them an illustrious member of this very family. A collective murmur rose. Poirot's moustaches twitched. A scandalous revelation, if true. He turned to Hastings. We must recover the missing chapter. Without it, the memoir is incomplete and the culprit at large. He strode to the desk, lifting the blank page to the light. With a touch of chalk, He revealed faint indentations, words pressed onto the underlying page when originally bound. He drew his notebook and scribbled OOLANDE PPINLUNDGREN. Hastings peered. Names Roland Espin and Lundgren. Poirot nodded. Precisely. 2 individuals exposed by Sir Reginald. One of these names belongs to our murderer, or the murderer's kin. Celeste gasped. Espin is our publisher's family name. Roland Hadrill's mother was born Espin. She glanced at Mr. Hadrill, who stood by the fireplace, fingers drumming. Hadrill's face tightened. Madame, he said quietly, I assure you, my family has no scandalous connections to Parisian forgeries. His voice wavered. Poirot surveyed the company. Celeste, loyal to Lord Eversham. Hastings, steadfast. Hadrill, uneasy. The household, staff, Flanders, steadfast, Mrs. Hudson, serene. Only one remained unaccounted, the chemist, James Fairchild, whose mother bore the surname Lundgren. Poirot stepped toward Fairchild, who stood near the gilded sideboard. Monsieur Fairchild, excusez-moi, may I inquire your mother's family name? Fairchild swallowed. Lundgren, yes, of Swedish perfumers' fame. Poirot nodded. Then, you are connected to both names revealed in the indentations? Fairchild's cheeks flushed. But my mother's line in Lundgren was unconnected to criminal enterprises. Poirot raised a finger. Mon ami, the ink of distress flows where secrets fester. Someone here sought to prevent exposure. He turned to Hadrill. Monsieur the publisher, you stand to lose profit if the memoir implicates a family of influence. Could you have removed the chapter to protect your enterprise? Hadrill's eyes flashed. You insult me, detective. My reputation rests upon authenticity. Poirot's gaze was unflinching. And yet, authenticity frightens you. Hadrill bowed his head. A single drop of sweat glinted on his brow. Celeste spoke out. I cannot believe our gracious host's publisher would stoop so low. Her voice trembled. Nor James Fairchild, whose admiration of these memoirs is sincere. Hastings glanced at Fairchild. You have a strong alibi. Last night you were in the West Wing laboratory, demonstrating fragrance stability to Mrs. Hudson. Mrs. Hudson nodded. He showed me his distillation apparatus until midnight. Poirot steepled his fingers. Then Hadrill had both motive and opportunity. Celeste will fetch his manuscripts from the study. Any dampness or residual glue might betray his handiwork. Celeste hurried away. Hadrill turned to Fairchild. This is absurd. Poirot held up a gentle hand. Patience, monsieur. We shall await the evidence. Moments later, Celeste returned with Hadrill's portfolio. Poirot examined each manuscript, noting the faint scent of rubber cement upon one page, where the missing leaf had been removed and replaced with a blank stub. He tapped his index finger. The watermark of glue upon this spine, fresh but crude. Only Hadrill had the binding tools to effect such a repair without detection. Hadrill sank into a chair. Very well. I confess, I feared that the revelation of my mother's name as Espin, tied to a forgery ring, would ruin my business and disgrace his lordship's family. So, I removed the offending chapter to negotiate its suppression. I intended to return it once a suitable agreement was reached. Lord Eversham's knuckles whitened upon the desk. You have deceived us all. Hadril bowed his head. "I acted in fear. Forgive me." Poirot closed his notebook and stepped back. "Let this be our lesson. Even the printed word may be silenced when power trembles, but the little grey cells will always resurrect the truth." He turned to Lord Eversham. "My lord, your memoir shall be restored tomorrow, with Chapter 7 rewritten and its scandal faced forthrightly, or at least negotiated openly." Lord Eversham breathed deeply. "Yes, Hercule. Let us not hide from the past, but learn from it." And so, as the sun climbed higher over Eversham Manor, the vanished chapter was returned to its rightful place, and the scandal resolved through confession rather than concealment. The scented quill, its ink now purged of fear, prepared to write anew the tale of justice triumphing over deception. Chapter 6. The Missing Essence. A low mist curled across the gravel forecourt of Eversham Manor at first light, softening the edges of hedges and cloaking the great house in a shroud of secrecy. Inside the library, Hercule Poirot stood beside the desk where the jasmine jar usually rested, arms folded beneath his waistcoat. But this morning the golden vessel was gone. Only the velvet-lined recess remained, its empty circle mocking the detective's unblinking gaze. Captain Hastings arrived breathless, clutching his morning paper. "Monsieur Poirot, I've just come from the pantry. No sign of the jar there. Mrs. Hudson says she locked it safely after yesterday's reading." Celeste. Montague appeared at the study door, her face pale as porcelain. "The jar is missing, yes. I fetched the replacement invitations and returned to find the recess bare. Without the jasmine essence, tonight's reading cannot capture my lord's intent." Poirot tapped his cane lightly. "Mon Dieu! A theft most refined. The same mixture of esteem and envy that drove the removal of a chapter now strikes at the heart of perfume itself." He inhaled the room's air. "And I detect no jasmine. Instead, a whisper of sandalwood, faint but present." He turned to Hastings, whose eyes followed the trail of the detective's nose. "Sandalwood, Madame Bartram's usual choice for polishing furniture." Hastings raised a questioning brow. "You suspect the junior maid?" "Not yet. Let us assemble the household." Poirot swept from the room with Hastings at his elbow. In the scullery, Mrs. Hudson greeted them as they marched in. "The jar was here after midnight, monsieur. I returned from supper to find it restored, then locked the cabinet." She shook her head. "This morning I found the lock undisturbed, but the jar gone." Poirot nodded. "A misdirection. The cabinet remains locked, yet the essence vanishes. The thief must have used a duplicate key, or entered via another route." He peered at the scullery's window. "Were windows secure?" Mrs. Hudson sighed. "All bolted. No sign of forced entry." They made their way to the panelled corridor outside the library. Lord Eversham, eyes heavy with worry, awaited them. Behind him stood James Fairchild, rubbing his brow, and Mr. Hadril, arms folded. Flanders hovered near the door, key-ring in hand. Poirot addressed the gathering. "Esteemed friends, the jasmine jar has been stolen. By whom and why we must discover. But first I observe that the lock remains intact. This exclusive key belongs to the library steward, Monsieur Flanders." He turned to Flanders. "May I inspect your keys, monsieur?" Flanders produced his ring. Poirot examined each key's warding under the lamplight. All match. No duplicates here. He handed them back. Thank you. Now, who among you might covet this jar? Madame, you test perfumes daily, yet sandalwood lingers. He glanced at Mrs. Hudson. You polish the shelves with sandalwood oil, oui? Mrs. Hudson nodded. A gentle polish, extracted from driftwood. That is my practice. Poirot nodded, and thus the scent left upon the jar's ledge to mislead us. Clever. He turned to Fairchild. Your mother's distillery sources, both jasmine and sandalwood. You mingled both oils in demonstration yesterday. Fairchild's face reddened. I did, to show their blending qualities, but I returned the samples to the laboratory. Did anyone see you? Hastings interjected. After midnight. Fairchild hesitated. I was in my laboratory until 11:30. Then I retired. He glanced at his empty satchel. I had no reason to fetch the jar. Poirot raised a gloved finger. Yet, whether by cunning or desperation, the jar vanished. Let us consider motive. The reading of Chapter 7 last night saw Mr. Hadrell's surrender of scandalous names. Might he now remove the jar to prevent further exposures tied to fragrance clues within that chapter? He turned to Hadrell, who shifted uneasily. Your business thrives on authenticity. Without jasmine, the reading loses its experiential power, and so affects your profits. Hadrell's lips twitched. Perhaps, monsieur, I would rather not risk another sabotage. Admirable candour, Poirot said dryly. Yet the scent of sandalwood offers you plausible deniability. He placed a hand on Hadrell's sleeve. Your cuff bore traces of sandalwood this morning. Did you not polish your desk before the servants arrived? Hadrell swallowed. I polish my own office, not this library. Poirot made a small note in his notebook, which leaves only one other with both access and motive, Celeste Montague. Silence fell. Celeste's breath caught. Me? I would never compromise. My lord's memoir reading. And yet, Poirot continued, you stand to gain by controlling the perfume's narrative. If the jasmine jar vanishes, the reading of the scented chapter, recounting your father's Levantine Odyssey, loses its essential dimension. You protect your own position. Celeste's lips trembled. No, I only aim to honour Sir Reginald's legacy. Poirot shook his head. Mademoiselle, passion for authenticity can become obsession. But I seek proof, not supposition. He tapped his cane. Observe the traces upon the library floor. The dust reveals a single set of slippered footprints, gliding towards the secret passage panel that only you know, and the panel's edge bears a faint smear of rose, your favourite scent, pointed. Your waxed hand pressed here to release the hidden alcove. Celeste's eyes widened. I led you to the passage once, when you sought the vanished manuscript, but I did not take the jar. Poirot raised a gloved palm. Nevertheless, someone entered that passage, retrieved the jasmine, and restored the jar case to its niche. He strode to the library door. Monsieur Flanders, show us the passage. Flanders retrieved a silver key and unlocked a concealed bolt in the panelling. With a soft creak, the door swung open to reveal the narrow stone corridor they had sealed. Chandeliers of jasmine perfume's ghosts seemed to linger in the gloom. Poirot descended its steps, Hastings and Celeste following. Halfway down, Poirot paused, shining his lantern on a small brass catch in the wall's rock. Here is where the thief collected the jar, sliding it from a hidden niche in the stone. He ran a finger along the sill, a sticky residue of old jasmine mixed with fresh sandalwood. The perpetrator cloaked the jasmine's aroma with sandalwood, then returned the jar after extracting its contents. Only one person would dare to alter a secret corridor once sealed. He turned to Fairchild. "You build your apparatus here, testing fragrance evaporation under controlled conditions." Fairchild swallowed. I did test stability. I wanted to see how the perfume changed over time." Poirot's gaze bore into him. "Without permission, and to your own ends, you removed the essence to prolong your study." Fairchild's posture crumpled. It was for research, so I might isolate the scent's core molecules. He glanced at Celeste. "I meant no malice. I needed fresh jasmine to refine the extract." Celeste closed her eyes. "And I suspected James, not myself." She turned to Fairchild. "I had no reason to take it. I only guided Monsieur Poirot once." Hastings laid a comforting hand on Fairchild's shoulder. "Then we have our culprit." Poirot nodded. "Yes, mon ami. The missing essence was removed by the chemist who prized its molecular beauty above its cultural purpose. He hid it here to prevent evaporation, but in doing so, he nearly dashed the reading. He placed his cane upon the corridor's threshold. Let us return the jar and restore the scented chapter to its fullness." They re-emerged into the library, carrying the jasmine jar cradled in Celeste's arms. Poirot sealed the secret passage once more, pressing the catch until it resisted. Back at the desk, Fairchild replaced the jar, setting it gently into its velvet cup. Celeste closed the glass doors with reverent care. Poirot tapped his cane. "Now, the jar stands secure, its content reclaimed from the shadows." He turned to Fairchild. "Your research may continue in the laboratory under proper supervision." Fairchild bowed. "Yes, monsieur, thank you." Celeste clasped her hands. "We shall speak of this no more, and tonight the reading of Chapter 7 shall proceed with both text and scent united." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And may every guest inhale truth as deeply as perfume." Thus closed the 6th chapter of Hercule Poirot and the case of the scented quill, where the essence of secrecy took form in scent, and where the detective's unerring instinct restored both text and fragrance to their rightful place. Chapter 7. A Breath of Peril. A chill November dawn crept through the tall library, windows of Eversham Manor, painting the polished oak in ghostly light. The great leather-bound volumes stood silent on their shelves, and the empty recess where the jasmine jar once rested seemed to whisper of past deceptions. Yet it was not the library's familiar hush that drew Hercule Poirot's attention. No, this morning he perceived an undercurrent of alarm in the air, as though the very walls themselves had grown uneasy. Poirot entered quietly, followed by Captain Hastings, their footsteps muted on the carpet. The detective's black eyes swept the reading table at the room's centre. There, upon a corner of its velvet cloth, lay a small brass atomizer, its nozzle bent and still leaking a fine pale mist into the air. Hastings raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall seeing that before, monsieur." Poirot's moustaches quivered as he inclined his head. "No, Hastings, this instrument is not part of Celeste's collection. And see how the varnish upon the atomizer's pump bears a faint smear of crimson, possibly rose oil." He drew closer, inhaling deliberately. "And behind me—" He swept a gloved finger in an arc through the air. A sharper fragrance mingled with the lingering jasmine, a bitter, metallic tang, unmistakable to one accustomed to such things. Hastings's face blanched. Cyanide gas? Before Hastings could confide his worry, a cry echoed from the doorway. "Monsieur! Madame!" Two frantic servants, Mr. Flanders and Mrs. Hudson, burst into the room, their faces ashen. Flanders held aloft a small silver tray. "Miss Montague! She's collapsed in the ante-room. I found her there, unconscious beside the closed cabinet door." He laid the tray on the table and rushed away. Poirot swept past him towards the anteroom door. Hastings followed. On a small ottoman in the anteroom lay Celeste Montague, her eyes fluttering beneath closed lids, breath shallow, a faint mist curling about her lips. Dr. Lawson knelt beside her, testing her pulse. He looked up as they entered. Cyanide inhalation, minimal exposure, but enough to render her unconscious. I've administered stimulants. She should recover. Poirot knelt and gently checked Celeste's wrist. "Merci, doctor." He rose and stood before the atomizer, whose final hiss echoed like a muted sigh. "Let us secure this room and inquire of its secrets." He motioned to Flanders. "Lock all doors. No one may enter or leave without my direction." The steward obeyed, bolting the doors as Mrs. Hudson returned, cap in hand and terror in her eyes. Once they were alone, Poirot surveyed the scene. The atomizer lay upon the tray, its metal still slick with oil and residue. Hastings, standing by the reading table, sniffed at the mist settling on his cuff. Rose, definitely rose. And look here, beneath the tray, small footprints in the dust made by slippers, no larger than a woman's size 5. He knelt and traced the prints. They lead to the cabinet door, and back again. Poirot's gaze followed the footprints. Our assailant entered the library, disguising intent with a rose scent, sprayed the gas here, then fled. Afterwards, the cabinet door was closed from within. He tapped his cane thoughtfully. But who among us wields such an instrument, and knows the cabinet's secret catch? He turned to Hastings. "We must question each resident and find the wearer of size 5 slippers." He looked at Mrs. Hudson. "Madame, whose slippers might these be?" Mrs. Hudson's hand shook as she gazed at Poirot. "Madame Fairchild, sir. She wears the daintiest slippers of all. I saw her slip them off last night before retiring." She swallowed. "She uses rose-petal pillows at the foot of her bed." Poirot nodded. "Then we commence with Lady Fairchild." He stepped toward the library door. Celeste, supported by Dr. Lawson, was borne away on a chaise longue. Hastings followed. The detective's mind worked swiftly. Motive, means, opportunity. They found Lady Fairchild in her sitting room, adjusting a rose-scented fan before the fire. She looked up, her violet silk gown shimmering in the lamplight. Poirot introduced Hastings, then spoke. "Lady Fairchild, may I ask you to show me your slippers?" The lady's eyebrows lifted. "My slippers? But why?" Poirot's voice remained calm. They may resemble the footprints in the dust of the library." She slipped her feet from beneath the long hem of her gown and retrieved a pair of rose velvet slippers from beside her chair. Poirot took them, placing them in the dust by the reading table. The fit was exact. "It is yours," Poirot stated gently, "and yours alone." Lady Fairchild's composure faltered. "Monsieur Poirot, She drew in a shuddering breath. "Yes, they are mine. But I wore them only to stroll the hall before dawn. I did not use that device." Hastings stepped forward. "Then, whose is it?" Poirot placed the slippers aside and returned to the atomizer. "Your rose fan," he pointed to the one on her lap, "and your favourite perfume are both rose-based. Yet this atomizer's pump bears not only rose oil, but traces of jasmine and the bitter almond of prussic acid." He tapped his moustaches. "You recognised the reading's sensory delight should blossom with jasmine, and you sought to replace it with your own preferred fragrance, rose. But how to mask the poison's odour? With mere rose scent alone, you would fail. So you deployed the bitter almond compound to stupefy Mademoiselle Montague, whom you perceived as an obstacle." Lady Fairchild's lips trembled. I required her to vanish from the reading. She was to unveil Chapter 7's Paris scandal, naming my mother's family as forgers. I did not wish a repeat of yesterday's public disgrace." Her voice broke. "I only intended to incapacitate her, to frighten her into silence." Hastings frowned. "You nearly killed her?" Lady Fairchild bowed her head. "Alas, yes. The gas was stronger than I envisaged." Poirot turned to Hastings. "Fetch Mademoiselle Montague to corroborate her recovery, and then draw the windows to rid the house of this noxious air." Hastings hurried off. Poirot stayed beside Lady Fairchild. "Mademoiselle's fate aside, you must understand. The removal of scandal by force reveals a heart ungoverned by justice. Yet confession may yet salvage your honour." He folded his hands. "Will you accompany me to the library to attest the atomizer's provenance?" She rose shakily, her rose fan fluttering in trembling fingers. Back in the library, the detective guided her to the tray. "Touch the pump, Lady Fairchild." She did, and her rose velvet glove pressed against the nozzle. "See how the residue transfers to your glove, traces of rose, jasmine, and prussic acid." Poirot tapped the metal tray. "You cleaned it here, and here you dropped a glove fibre when the cabinet door snapped shut behind you." He held up a stray red velvet fibre. "This matches your slippers and your fan's lining." Lady Fairchild closed her eyes. "I'm guilty." At that moment, Celeste Montague entered, supported by Dr. Lawson. Her cheeks still pale, she managed a faint nod. Poirot inclined toward her. "Mademoiselle, you may confirm Lady Fairchild's presence here?" Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I heard footsteps in the corridor, then the hiss of the atomizer." She shivered. "I would have died had Dr. Lawson not arrived." Lady Fairchild turned to Celeste. "I am so sorry." Celeste's lip quivered, but she pressed a handkerchief to her nose. "Let us end this here." Poirot stepped between them. "Mademoiselle, Lady Fairchild, I implore you both to see that the reading continues this evening with the atomizer sealed away, and that the memoirs be judged by words, not by the whims of scent." Lady Fairchild inclined her head. "Yes, monsieur, I will face the consequences." Celeste gave a weak nod. "And I will help her." Poirot tapped his cane. Then justice is served, and the case of the scented quill advances toward its final chapters, where scent, ink, and the human heart shall be laid bare. As the library's windows were flung open, a fresh breeze blew through, carrying away the last wisp of perfume and poison alike. And in that restoring air, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a satisfied smile. For once more, the truth had risen above subterfuge, guided by the unerring logic of the little grey cells. Chapter 8. The Mastermind Revealed. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of Eversham Manor's library, gilding the oak panelling in burnished gold. After the tumult of the past week, poisoned consommes, vanished chapters, stolen essences, and noxious gases, the household gathered once more for the final reading of Sir Reginald Eversham's memoirs. The great crimson volume lay open on its lectern, the scented quill poised beside it. All present wore an air of expectancy. Lord Eversham himself in the high chair of honour, Celeste Montague at his right, pale yet resolute, Captain Hastings beside Hercule Poirot, eyes bright with anticipation, and Mr. Hadrell, the publisher, at Celeste's left, attending to an ornate notebook. Across the room, the servants stood at attention. Mrs. Hudson, prim and vigilant, Flanders, with keys in hand, and Lady Fairchild and James Fairchild, their earlier transgressions barely concealed beneath polite smiles. The atmosphere crackled with tension, an undercurrent of suspicion passing from one face to the next. Poirot himself surveyed the company with implacable calm. He touched the quill, testing its weight, and inhaled the faint trace of jasmine still clinging to its ebony shaft. "Mon ami," he murmured to Hastings, "observe how the quill gleams, as though eager to write history anew." Hastings nodded. "I dare say none of us will forget this evening." Lord Eversham rose and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your patience and fortitude. Tonight we conclude the unveiling of my father's memoirs. Monsieur Poirot, the floor is yours." A hush fell. Poirot stepped forward, his cane tapping lightly on the floorboards. He picked up the scented quill by its stem and held it aloft. "Mesdames et messieurs, before we proceed, I believe we owe one another the truth of the recent irregularities." He allowed the quill to rest in its cradle. "It is time to reveal the architect behind these disruptions." A murmur rippled through the room as guests exchanged startled glances. Poirot raised a ponderous finger. All were tempted. Some acted. But who orchestrated each crime for a single purpose? He paused, letting the suspense build. At last he spoke. "Monsieur Roland Hadrell, you." Hadrell's face drained of colour. He rose, clearing his throat with difficulty. "Monsieur Poirot, me?" "Yes," Poirot replied firmly. "You who stand at the nexus of every misdeed. The forging of the scented invitation, the theft of the quill, the poisoning of Lady Inglewood, the removal of Chapter 7, the vanishing of the jasmine essence, and even the gas intended for Mademoiselle." Hastings straightened. "You've been behind it all." Poirot nodded. "Each crime bore your subtle signature. The manipulation of scent to conceal and mislead. An artisan of aroma, turning perfume to poison in pursuit of profit." He placed a sympathetic hand on Hadril's shoulder. "You engineered scandal to make these memoirs irresistible, each disruption feeding the flames of curiosity, swelling sales, and ensuring your enterprise's triumph." A tremor ran through the assembled guests. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. You betrayed us all?" Hadril bowed his head. "I confess, in the quest for sensational success, I lost my moral compass. Forgive me." Poirot surveyed the silent company. "You manipulated each of us. You forged the scented invitation to sow doubt. You stole the quill so that James Fairchild might recover it for your firm's display, leveraging his curiosity. You spiked the consommé so Lady Inglewood would faint, creating dramatic headlines. You removed the scandalous chapter to protect your mother's reputation when it suited you. You absconded with the jasmine essence to engineer yet another delay. And finally, you planned to spray Prussic-laced vapours upon Celeste, ensuring the grand reading would collapse in tragedy." Hadril's voice shook. "Yes, but I never meant anyone serious harm. Only spectacle." Poirot tapped his cane. "But spectacle at the cost of lives and honour is not mere business. It is villainy. You turned our personal vulnerabilities into marketing fodder." Lady Fairchild stepped forward, mantling her violet silk. "You nearly killed my cousin." Her voice quavered with anger. James Fairchild, face drawn, added, "You exploited my scientific interests, then discarded me when I balked at such extremes." Celeste Montague's composure broke. "You stole my trust and nearly my life." Hadril looked at each face, remorse etched upon him. I see that now." Poirot inclined his head. "Might I suggest you rectify your wrongs by preventing further publication of these memoirs until all parties consent, and by offering recompense to those you harmed?" Hadril nodded vigorously. "Yes, I will do all that is required. The memoirs shall be postponed, and the journalistic rights relinquished." Poirot smiled, a rare warmth flickering across his features. "Then justice and mercy have triumphed together." He addressed the company. "Let us also note that the scented quill itself bears a lesson. The subtlest aroma can hide the foulest intent, yet also guide us to the truth." Lord Eversham stepped forward and extended his hand to Hadril. "I accept your contrition. Let us move forward, united rather than divided by scandal." The two men clasped hands, and Celeste and Lady Fairchild exchanged tentative nods. As the heavy tension that had gripped the library dissolved, Poirot took up the quill once more and held it high. "Now, for the final chapter of this evening's entertainment." He opened the memoir to the restored Chapter 7 and dipped the quill into the jasmine oil. A hush fell as he began to read. "In the winter of 1870, my path led me beneath the perfumed arches of Damascus, where I discovered that every scent, like every secret, carries in it the power to heal or to destroy." His voice flowed easily, weaving the tapestry of memory and fragrance, and as the guests listened, hearts at last unburdened by suspicion, the scented quill glided across the page, its journey through deception and danger complete, and the truth at last restored. Chapter 9. The Secret of the Lost, Formula Morning. Light filtered through the leaded panes of the Eversham library. illuminating the rows of books whose spines now glittered with the dust of a new day. The crimson volume of Sir Reginald's memoirs lay open upon its lectern, the scented quill resting in its cradle, silent at last. After the dramatic revelations of the reading, Roland Hadrill's confession, the restoration of the stolen chapter, and the near-fatal gas attack, an uneasy calm had settled upon the household. Yet Hercule Poirot sensed that another mystery awaited him, hidden within the ink-stained pages. He stood, cane in hand, beside Captain Hastings, who had taken up his post by the window with a cup of steaming tea. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured, "observe these marginal notes." He tapped a slender finger against a paper edge. Sir Reginald was nothing if not meticulous. Yet here, on the flap of Chapter 8, lies a tiny symbol, like a perfumer's sigil. Hastings leaned in, squinting. "I see 2 interlaced roses. But it wasn't printed there. It must be a late edition." "Yes," Poirot nodded. "Someone added it by hand. And see there." He pointed to the top corner of Chapter 9. Small dot, inked in lavender. The same dot appears before each chapter that mentions Sir Reginald's greatest creation, the Eversham elixir. He drew in a breath. "A code, Hastings, a cipher buried in plain sight. I believe Sir Reginald concealed his final perfume formula within these memoirs, trusting only the perceptive to find it." Hastings set down his cup. "A hidden formula! No wonder Monsieur Hadrill contrived such scandal to boost sales for that very recipe. But how shall we extract it?" Poirot tapped his moustaches. "We must follow Sir Reginald's clues. He referenced the sigil of intertwined roses and the lavender dot, so we turn to Chapter 8's text." He closed the book and then reopened it to the marked page, then produced a slender notebook. "Let us transcribe only the words following each lavender dot, and decode Sir Reginald's instructions." For the next hour, the 2 men worked in companionable silence, Hastings reading aloud each marked phrase, "Measure by moonlit hour, blend with tears of dew, distill beneath the rosebush arch," while Poirot noted them in his scratch-pad, aligning them into a coherent set of directions. At last, Poirot laid down his quill. "Voilà! Sir Reginald's recipe, a nocturnal distillation of jasmine, rose, and rare ambergris, captured at the moment of midnight's chime." He tapped the list. "But the instructions conclude, 'Seek the moonstone shard beneath my father's desk.'" Hastings whistled softly. "A moonstone shard? Now we move from ink to treasure hunt." "Precisely," Poirot said, slipping the notebook into his breast pocket. "And the desk, he means, is not this library lectern, but the great wainscoted desk in his private laboratory, concealed in the west wing." He swept his gaze toward the door. "Come, mon ami, another expedition beckons." The west wing corridors, seldom traversed since Sir Reginald's passing, lay hushed and shadowed. Faded tapestries muffled footsteps as Poirot and Hastings approached a pair of heavy oak doors. Hastings raised a hesitant hand. "Do we have permission for this intrusion, monsieur?" Poirot smiled. "My lord's memoirs authorise the quest, and Celeste has retired to her room, exhausted after last night's drama. We shall disturb no one." He pressed a hidden latch in the panelling. The doors swung open to reveal the laboratory, beyond, brilliant with long-forgotten glassware and rows of labelled apothecary jars. At the centre stood Sir Reginald's ebony desk, its leather writing surface ravaged by time. Poirot advanced and ran a gloved finger along its edge. "Here, Hastings, beneath the left-hand drawer." He inserted a slender silver key, oblique as the desk's design required. The drawer yielded with a soft click, revealing a velvet-lined compartment. Within lay a small oval shard of iridescent moonstone, its edges worn by age. Hastings picked it up, marvelling at its glow. "Remarkable! Oracular gem." Poirot inclined his head. Sir Reginald believed certain minerals lent perfume potency. Now, Hastings, we must combine this moonstone with the distilled essences in his copper alembic. He pointed to a gleaming apparatus in the corner. "We start the nocturnal distillation here, at once, for the formula must be precise." Together, they gathered the necessary ingredients: purified water from the estate spring, jasmine oil, rescued from the restored jar, rose petal tincture from Celeste's larder, and a measure of Sir Reginald's original ambergris. Hastings arranged them in the alembic, while Poirot consulted the notebook. At the stroke of 10 minutes to midnight, horseless though they were, they lit the burner's flame and began the slow condensation. As the clear vapour coiled into the receiving flask, Poirot spoke softly. "Hastings, do you recall Sir Reginald's words about this elixir?" Hastings nodded. He claimed it would render the wearer enduringly remembered. A fragrance to outlive even the longest life. Poirot smiled wryly. A poet's hyperbole, or perhaps the secret of immortality by scent. He peered into the flask as a pale gold liquid gathered. Suddenly, a faint sound behind them, shuffling footsteps. Hastings spun to see James Fairchild slip into the doorway, eyes wide. "Monsieur Poirot, I followed you. I had to see." Poirot regarded him calmly. "Monsieur Fairchild, you covet this recipe as you covet every rare compound. Yet you have no right to intrude unbidden." Fairchild's lips trembled. "I'm sorry. I only wish to ensure its safety. I feared Monsieur Hadrel might snatch it for his unscrupulous gain." He held out a gloved hand. "Allow me to assist." Poirot's eyes softened. "You mean well, but this process requires precision and restraint. One misstep, and the elixir's delicate balance will fail." He paused, then offered a nod. "Very well. Stand aside and observe, not touch." Fairchild exhaled in relief and retreated to the shadow. At the stroke of midnight, the final drops dripped into the flask, each one a glimmer of liquid gold. Poirot carefully removed the moonstone, its pale luminescence now dim. He capped the flask and placed it within a wooden box lined in velvet. "The elixir is complete." He handed it to Hastings. "Lock it away for safekeeping, in your quarters, where no hungry eye may find it." Hastings accepted it solemnly. "Of course, monsieur." Poirot then added, "And inform Lord Eversham come dawn. He may choose whether to bottle his father's legacy or to let it remain a memory." Hastings inclined his head. At the turn of the corridor, Hastings paused. "Poirot, do you think we've truly seen the end of intrigue?" The detective considered the flask. "This house has known poison and scandal, but now we hold a formula of rare beauty, a provocation to new temptations." He tapped his moustaches. "Our duty is to protect it with vigilance, and to trust in the better nature of these people. They returned to the library, replacing Sir Reginald's memoirs upon their stand. The house, stirred by the subtle alchemy that had taken place, seemed to exhale a gentle sigh of relief. In the rocking of the lamps and the hush of the books, a new chapter awaited, one of restoration rather than retribution. As they crossed the threshold to the grand hall, Celeste Montague emerged, worry etched upon her features. Hastings offered the wooden box. "The elixir, mademoiselle, for your lord's consideration." She accepted it with trembling fingers. "Thank you both." Poirot inclined, his heart light for the first time since the ordeal began. "The little grey cells have guided us through smoke and mirrors, and now to distilled truth." He paused, gazing up at the portraits of Sir Reginald that lined the corridors. "May this fragrance, like his memory, linger in the hearts of all who knew him." And so, as the candlelight flickered and a new dawn approached the manor, the lost formula of Eversham was secured, and another layer of mystery, at once delicate and profound, was laid to rest under Poirot's unwavering vigilance. Chapter 10. The Theft of the Eversham Elixir. The sun had not yet risen when a shrill alarm rang through Eversham Manor, summoning the household staff in frenzied haste. In the dim light of dawn, lanterns bobbed along corridors as servants hurried to the library, where Lord Eversham's precious relic now lay hidden. Sir Reginald's Eversham elixir, freshly distilled the night before in the hidden laboratory. Its cedar-lined wooden box sat upon the lectern, but one of its flanged lids was sprung, and the delicate flask within held only half its luminous gold liquid. Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings were the first to arrive. Hastings stooped over the hearthrug, where a faint, oily smear glistened on the polished floorboards. "By Jove, Poirot! It looks as though someone forced the lid and spilled the rest." He pointed to a single slippered footprint near the hearth, smaller than fair, more akin to a dame's dancing slipper. Poirot crouched to examine the trace by the fire, his keen eyes assessing each detail. "Notice, Hastings, the soot upon the slipper's sole, distinct from the library's hearth fire. This one bears the residue of the laboratory's burner, which emits a pale grey ash. Our thief visited the lab, then returned here to drain the vial." He rose, adjusting his waistcoat with clinical precision. "But note also the absence of any other footprints. The culprit wore slippers to muffle their steps, and no one disturbed the hearth's embers." Lord Eversham joined them, his face ashen. "Half my father's elixir gone. I can scarcely believe it." His voice cracked. Celeste Montague hovered at his elbow, trembling. "I locked the box myself last night," she whispered. "I returned the flask to the lectern and bolted the glass doors. No one could have entered unless I was deceived." Poirot offered a reassuring nod. "Let us restore order, then consider who among us could contrive such a theft." He motioned for Flanders, the steward, who stepped forward with hat in hand. "Monsieur Flanders, whose keys grant access to the library?" Flanders held out the heavy ring. "Only the housekeeper, Dr. Lawson, and myself possess copies, besides Lady Fairchild and Monsieur Hadrell, who assisted with last night's preparations." Hastings frowned. "That's 5 people with access, but only one footprint. Who among them wears slippers?" He glanced at each face in the flickering lantern light. Mrs. Hudson, prim and composed, Dr. Lawson, brow furrowed. Lady Fairchild, in violet morning wrap. Mr. Hadrell, looking pale. And Flanders himself, in polished boots. Celeste drew up beside them. And don't forget James Fairchild. He has access as chemist, and he prefers soft slippers. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Ah, Monsieur Fairchild, do you wear slippers to your nocturnal experiments? Fairchild started, his cheeks flushing. He looked down at his velvet slippers, trimmed in silver. I remove my riding boots in the lab, yes, and wear these. But I did not enter the library after returning the jar. Very well, Poirot said. Let us examine the laboratory. He led the party through a side corridor to the west wing. The laboratory door stood ajar, its latch askew. Inside, the copper alembic sat cold and silent. The work table bore smears of jasmine oil, rose tincture, and most telling, the sprinkling of pale grey ash from the burner. Hastings swept his lantern beam across the floor. I see 2 footprints here, one from slippers, the other from boots, muddy, from the garden path. Poirot nodded. Our thief visited the lab twice, first in slippers to decant the elixir, second in boots to fetch water to rinse the flask before transfer. He stepped to the work table and sniffed the air. And here, Hastings, the gas trap we set for the quill thief stood still, its nozzle caked with residue. He ran a finger along a loaf of bread set upon the shelf. The thief must have tripped it in haste, escaping through the secret passage, wearing boots to avoid detection. Hastings whistled softly. So we have 2 sets of prints in 2 locations. Slippers in the library, boots in the lab, meaning the same individual changed footwear to evade notice. He furrowed his brow. But who kept both slippers and boots at hand? Only one, Poirot said. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, her riding boots by the stable entrance, and her carpet slippers in her quarters. He turned and strode to the door to summons her. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson arrived, bonnet in hand, eyebrows arching at the assembled group. Poirot faced her gently. Madam, whose slippers do you wear in the house? Mrs. Hudson's lips quivered. I wear these in the morning, monsieur, for comfort. But last night I left them by my bedside. Those slippers are mine. He produced a slipper from the hearth, muddy beneath the sole and worn at the heel. Compare them. She took the slipper and gasped. They are indeed mine, though I've not worn them here. Her voice trembled. I went to the lab last night to fetch extra oil for Lady Fairchild's perfume. I then returned here to ensure the doors were secure. Celeste Montague interjected. But you did not fetch oil. You took the elixir. She held back tears. I trusted you. Mrs. Hudson's face reddened. Forgive me, mademoiselle, I had no choice. I sold my family's home to save my son's life. Sir Reginald's elixir could fetch a fortune, enough to pay for his treatment. Her voice broke. I did not mean to betray my lady. Poirot's gaze softened. Madame, your motive sprang from desperation, yet theft and deception cannot be condoned. He turned to Lord Eversham. My lord, how shall you judge this matter? Lord Eversham's face was grave. Madam Hudson, you have served my family loyally for decades. Your sacrifice speaks of a mother's love. I cannot condemn you to ruin. You shall repay what you took in time and service. The elixir, once made whole, shall restore both your position and your honour." Mrs. Hudson's tears glistened as she bowed her head. I thank you, my lord." Poirot stepped forward and retrieved his silver screech, an invention to recover stolen perfumes. He held it aloft. "Let us now replenish the flask and secure it in triple-locked chambers, and may this final breach of trust remind us all that the sweetest fragrance can mask the bitterest act." That evening, the household gathered once more in the library, fewer in number but stronger in unity. Lord Eversham raised a cheer as the refilled Eversham elixir gleamed in its box. Celeste Montague poured the golden liquid into tiny crystal phials for the guests. Even Mrs. Hudson, now restored to her proud apron, served with a shy smile. Poirot stood at the head of the lectern, his impeccable form a beacon of calm. "My friends, we have seen deception by invitation, by ink, by poison, by theft, and by gas. Yet through it all truth has prevailed. The Eversham elixir, born of jasmine moonlight and rose-tinted memory, shall now be shared only in friendship, its power untainted by greed." He tapped his cane. "Let its fragrance remind us the human heart, fragrant with compassion, outlasts every perfumed deceit." Glasses clinked and laughter rang clear as the little grey cell's work once again restored harmony to Eversham Manor. Thus closed the 10th chapter of Hercule Poirot and the case of the scented quill, where even stolen essences found their way home, guided by the unwavering logic of a brilliant mind. Chapter 11. The Purloined Notebook. A brittle frost glazed the lawns of Eversham Manor the following morning, lending every branch and slate a diamond sparkle. Inside the hushed library, the red velvet-backed chair of Sir Reginald's memoirs sat empty, its lectern forlorn, without the leather-bound notebook that Hercule Poirot had used to record the discovered recipe for the Eversham elixir. Captain Hastings was the first to notice its absence, just as the first beams of winter sunlight crept between the oak mullions. "Mon Dieu!" Hastings exclaimed. "The notebook is gone!" He rifled through the velvet cushion where Poirot had laid it after transcribing the formula. Only a single blank page remained, its edges untouched by ink. The detective entered, cane tapping softly, brows arching beneath his waxed moustaches. "Indeed, Hastings, my private record of Sir Reginald's hidden recipe has vanished as completely as the elixir itself once did." Lord Eversham, summoned at once, hurried into the room with Celeste Montague and Dr. Lawson. Each froze upon seeing the empty cushion. Celeste's hand flew to her throat. "But I locked this cabinet last night. The glass doors were secure." Dr. Lawson crossed his arms, face sombre. "No one reported forced entry, my lord." Poirot surveyed each in turn. Lord Eversham in pale morning coat, Celeste with tremulous fingers, Hastings in rumpled smoking jacket, Dr. Lawson in crisp linen, and James Fairchild standing in slippers by the hearth. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, appeared at the door. I heard your call, monsieur. May I assist?" Hastings pointed at the cushion. "The notebook is missing. We need keys to this cabinet. Dr. Lawson, Flanders, Lady Fairchild, and myself." Mrs. Hudson shook her head. "Only Madame Montague and Mr. Hastings have copied keys besides the steward." Poirot nodded. "Then our suspects number but 3. Yet let us begin our inquiry with evidence. He crouched by the hearth where James Fairchild had been standing. "Observe, Hastings, the hearthrug bears 4 faint footprints, 1 pair in velvet slippers and 1 in rough-soled riding boots. The slippers lead from the alcove to the cabinet. The boots continue toward the door." Hastings knelt, touching the slate-like dust. "Those slipper prints match Lady Fairchild's slippers, size 5, but she's in the drawing-room." Hastings hurried off to fetch her. Poirot rose and turned to Dr. Lawson. "Doctor, what of your boots? Do you own riding boots?" Dr. Lawson lifted one shoe. "Only these, standard indoor slippers. I do not ride." Poirot tapped his cane. "Then it remains our chemist, Monsieur Fairchild, who wears velvet slippers indoors and boots for garden work." James's face blanched. "But I did not take it." Poirot held a gloved finger to his lips. "Patience. We shall confirm." He led Fairchild to the laboratory in the west wing. There, on the copper alembic stand, lay a scrap of leather, matching the heel of riding boots, and a smear of ambergris oil upon the glass. Hastings sniffed. "Ambergris, your ingredient for the elixir, monsieur." Fairchild swallowed. "Yes, but I was refining the batch until late." Poirot examined the smear, and this sticky deposit transferred to the notebook's binding. "Seen in the residue on the sugar tongs tray in your kitchenette." He beckoned Hastings. "Fetch the tray." Moments later, the silver tray glinted under the lamp, bearing a similar ambergris stain and 2 flecks of leather fibre. Hastings held them aloft. "The same fibre as in the hearth prints." Poirot nodded. Mon ami, our chemist visited the library, wearing slippers, took the notebook, presumably to compare his experimental notes, and then, fearing discovery, changed into riding boots by the lab door. He glanced at Fairchild, who trembled. "Why, monsieur?" James's eyes brimmed with tears. He drew in a shuddering breath. "Forgive me, Monsieur Poirot. I feared that once the elixir's recipe was public, it would be exploited by Monsieur Hadrill's publishers, sold cheaply and adulterated. I hoped to protect Sir Reginald's legacy by hiding the formula until Celeste and I could produce it faithfully in our own workshop." His voice broke. "I did not wish to harm anyone, only to guard the purity of the recipe." Celeste stepped forward, her cheeks pale. "James, you endangered us all, and nearly lost the formula again." She clasped his arm. "But I understand. Your devotion is commendable, though misguided." Lord Eversham approached, his cane tapping a gentle rhythm. "My dear godson, your intention sprang from loyalty. Yet secrecy breeds suspicion. Come to me with your concerns next time. This family stands with you." Poirot offered a slight bow to Lord Eversham, then to Fairchild. "A confession well made. And now let us restore the notebook to its proper place." He led them back to the library. Mrs. Hudson unlocked the cabinet, and Hastings replaced the notebook upon its velvet cushion. Poirot ran a gloved fingertip over its spine. Safe once more. He turned to the assembly, and let this conclude the 11th mystery of the scented quill, where the most precious knowledge can be stolen by the noblest of motives. Yet, like perfume itself, truth will outlast every concealment. He tapped his nose. "Thus, mon ami, we preserve Sir Reginald's legacy, and the unerring triumph of little grey cells over the frailties of the heart." In the soft glow of morning, Eversham Manor exhaled a breath of relief. as the notebook's safe return heralded a fresh promise, that knowledge once shared need no longer be hidden in shadows. Chapter 12. The Midnight Orchid Mystery, a Silvery. Frost glazed the eaves and windows of Eversham Manor just before dawn, lending the grounds a hushed, otherworldly stillness. Within the vast conservatory of the west wing, glass panes fogged with breath. The rare midnight orchids, Sir Reginald's pride, should have been in full bloom. These phantom white blossoms, prized for their nocturnal fragrance, were essential to the final refinement of the Eversham elixir. Yet when the gardener, Monsieur Dupré, arrived for his morning rounds, he found empty pots and broken stems scattered upon the heated stone floor. At the first frantic summons, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings arrived with lanterns. Dupré knelt by a shattered pot, his rugged face drawn with dismay. Monsieur Poirot, they are gone, every last one. He gestured to the bare soil. These plants took a year to cultivate under the strictest conditions, and they flower only once at midnight. Poirot crouched to inspect the damage. Trampled leaves, snapped canes, soil tracked toward the service door. Observe, Hastings, footprints in soft earth. Only one set, size 9, heavy tread. Not the slippered marks of Lady Fairchild, nor the neat soles of James Fairchild's laboratory boots. Rather, stout soles, Monsieur Dupré's own hobnailed gardener's boots. Hastings frowned. Surely Dupré would not destroy his own orchids. Dupré shook his head vehemently. I care for them as a mother for her children. No, monsieur, someone wore my boots, likely from the shed. His voice trembled. I keep them there. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Then our thief donned these boots to mislead us, framing the gardener. He stood and beckoned Dupré. Fetch your boots, those clean and dry, and bring them here. Moments later, Dupré returned, pulling off his well-worn boots with a hiss of protest. Poirot compared these to the prints in the soil. The real boots bore only a light dusting of potting soil, and no fresh scuffs. The prints at the scene were slathered in wet compost. The weights are wrong, Poirot said. Our impostor replaced your boots in the shed and made prints with ones stolen from the greenhouse. He directed Dupré back to replace his boots. Poirot turned to the group gathered in the conservatory. Lord Eversham, pale and anxious. Celeste Montague, cheeks flushed with worry. Captain Hastings, James Fairchild, Lady Fairchild, Mr. Hadrell, Dr. Lawson, Mrs. Hudson, and Flanders the steward. Mes amis, Poirot said, voice calm yet firm. The midnight orchids have been purloined. We must identify the culprit who would risk every other bloom to claim these rare flowers. He swept his gaze across the company. Who benefits? The orchids supply the final note in the elixir, a memory of moonlight and jasmine. With them, a perfumer can charge a princely sum. Who among you stands to gain most? Mr. Hadrell cleared his throat. My firm had planned to license the elixir, but the addition of orchid attar would command even greater prestige. He swallowed. I only intended to test small samples, not steal every plant. James Fairchild stepped forward. I needed one bloom to perfect the attar for purity. I had permission to take a single orchid from the cutting bed, reserved for experiments. He gestured toward Dupré. Monsieur Dupré agreed last night when I fetched moisture samples. Dupré shook his head. "You took none, monsieur." He glared at James's lab coat. "Your laboratory slippers bear no orchid sap." Poirot tapped his cane. "We shall verify. Monsieur Fairchild, present your slippers." James removed them, revealing pristine velvet shoes. Poirot sniffed each. No trace of orchid pollen, yet the air here still trembles with a scent of heated soil and crushed blooms. He pointed to Lady Fairchild. "You entered the conservatory at midnight to place rose water on every surface. Do you deny it?" Lady Fairchild raised a gloved hand. "I only sought to freshen the air after the gas incident. Surely you recall." Poirot's eyes glittered. "An admirable precaution. But did you linger until the orchids were plucked?" Lady Fairchild's lips tightened. "No." Celeste Montague spoke next. "I visited at dawn to retrieve my father's botanical sketches. I would never harm the orchids." Poirot's narrow smile did not reach his eyes. "And yet your sketches were found upon the study desk last night without their orchid plates." He faced Mrs. Hudson. "Madame, did Celeste enter the greenhouse after midnight?" Mrs. Hudson hesitated. "I saw her lamp pass the window. Yes, around 1 o'clock." A murmur rose. Celeste's face paled. "I collected sketches and found the greenhouses locked." She pressed a hand to her lips. "But when I returned, the door was ajar." Poirot nodded. "As intended by our thief. A misdirection to implicate Celeste." He raised an eyebrow. "Then who truly broke the lock, using Monsieur Dupré's key, forged or borrowed?" He gestured to Flanders. "Steward, is there record of the master key being taken from your office?" Flanders produced his ledgers. "The key was returned last night at 10:30 by Lady Fairchild's housemaid, according to my watchman." Poirot paused. A new suspect, the maid. He turned to Mrs. Hudson. "Madame, summon your staff." Moments later, 2 housemaids appeared, bowed, their cap-pins trembling. Poirot addressed the younger of the 2. "Mademoiselle Bartram, did you enter the conservatory last night?" The maid's face blanched. I carried a lantern there to fetch a fallen rosebud. I left the door unlocked." Poirot held out a hand. "Your lantern?" The maid produced a small brass lamp. Poirot sniffed around its wick. Rose oil and crushed orchid pollen. The maid gasped. I dropped the rose, and my shoes slipped into the soil. I never touched the orchids themselves, I swear." Poirot tapped his moustache reflectively. "Then you witnessed another, at work, but feared to speak." He turned to the maids. "Which of you remained in the greenhouse until after 1?" Both shrank back. Finally the elder replied, "It was Mrs. Hudson. She borrowed my lamp and stayed late, promising to tend the heating stove." All eyes turned to Mrs. Hudson, whose lips parted in shock. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "the gardener's boots, the key's return, the borrowed lamp and the disturbed stove all place you in the greenhouse at the crucial hour." Mrs. Hudson bowed her head. "Yes, I took them." Her voice trembled. I sold them to a collector. You know how the world covets these blooms. My son's treatment fails. I need money to save his life." She wept. "I thought only once, just one night. I did not realize I had uprooted them all." Lord Eversham stepped forward, cane tapping the floor. "Madame, your devotion to your son is noble. But these orchids belong to my father's legacy. He placed a hand gently upon hers. "I will provide for your son's care, and you shall restore every bulb at my expense." Mrs. Hudson collapsed into grateful tears. Poirot swept the room with a final glance. Another chapter of loss and redemption. Our midnight orchids, once stolen for desperation, are rescued by compassion. He tapped his cane crisply. "Let us replant the greenhouse, and let the elixir of Eversham achieve its fullest bloom." As frost melted upon the greenhouses and the first orchids were replanted under the watchful eye of Monsieur Dupré, now joined by a grateful Mrs. Hudson, Poirot allowed a satisfied smile. In the pattern of footprints and the residue of pollen, he had unravelled yet another mystery, that the most precious fragrance can be stolen by sorrow, yet restored by the warm human heart. Chapter 13. The black-edged missive, sullen grey dawn, pressed against the mullioned windows of Eversham Manor, and within the hushed corridors a new portent of trouble unfurled. Captain Hastings was the first to discover it. As he made his early rounds, still in dressing-gown and slippers, he found upon the library's lectern a single sheet of fine parchment, its edges stained pitch-black, its ink a harsh crimson. The scented quill lay idle beside it, as though, outraged by this new insult, he scooped up the paper with trembling fingers and hastened to Monsieur Poirot's study. The little detective, roused reluctantly from his morning cocoa, peered over his pince-nez at the missive Hastings held. The letter bore no signature, only these words: "Tonight, at the stroke of 10, the final chapter of Sir Reginald's memoirs must be surrendered, or the truths within chapter 14 will be published to the scandal sheets, and your precious elixir dispensed to every charlatan in London. Keep faith with your rose, and the black orchid will bloom." Poirot's moustaches stiffened, turned to Hastings. Black orchid, scandal sheets, a menace to the family's honour and to Sir Reginald's legacy. But the writer demands the final chapter, the manuscript yet unprinted. They threaten to weaponize it. He laid the parchment on his desk and slid 2 fingers along the crimson stroke. "See here, Hastings, the pressure varies. This writer is accustomed to directing the flow of both ink and intrigue." Hastings swallowed. Who among us could have penned this? Poirot tapped his nose. "Let us consider scent and substance. The parchment carries the faint perfume of coffee and the acrid tang of cigar smoke, 2 unlikely companions." He drew in a breath. Coffee brewed in the servants' pantry, and cigars smoked by the steward, Flanders. Hastings blinked. Flanders? Surely not our loyal steward. "Yet we must follow the clues," Poirot replied. He donned his coat and cane, motioning Hastings to arm himself with a lantern. Together they descended to the pantry, where the scullery maid, Mrs. Bartram, was stacking cups. She curtsied at their approach. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, how may I assist?" Poirot surveyed the copper urn. This coffee urn has steam wheels stained with grounds. Yet here, he sniffed the rim, here lingers not the nutmeg or cinnamon that Madame Montague adds for flavour. Rather, the bitterness of untempered bean. It is the brew of someone in haste. Mrs. Bartram's gaze fell. I only filled it at dawn, but Mr. Flanders often fetches a cup before his morning rounds." Poirot pressed a finger to the shelf beside the sugar bowl. A single matchstick stub lay hidden behind a tin of tea. He lifted it gingerly. And here, a V-cut on its head, scorched by cigar ash. He glanced at Hastings. The steward's cigar. Tell me, Hastings, where does Flanders smoke? In the greenhouse, by the Rose Terrace, Hastings replied. He claims the fresh air suits him. Poirot nodded. Then to the greenhouse, mon ami. They hurried along the tiled corridor, their lanterns weaving narrow shafts of gold across the dark walls. Outside, the frost still clung to the vines. They found Flanders near the rose arch, boots making soft crunches in the gravel. He paused. At the sight of them, lantern light haloing their silhouettes. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, he said, shifting uneasily. What brings you here so early? Poirot held out the match stub and the parchment. You left these behind, monsieur. A matchlight for your cigar and this black-edged demand. He tapped the paper. You ask for the final chapter. Yet no chapter has been printed beyond chapter 15. You hope to extort the family's most damaging secret. Flanders swallowed. I had no choice. The manager at the publishing house, Sir Rowland Hadrill, promised me a position if I delivered the story first. My family in need of funds. I thought to copy the text last night. His face fell. I only stole the parchment, intending to copy it from Celeste's master, draft under the lamp in her study. Hastings folded the match carefully. But you used coffee grounds and cigar smoke to mask your trail. Flanders nodded miserably. Yes, coffee to muddle any scent of manuscript ink. Cigar smoke because I know you detest its odour indoors. I meant no lasting harm, only that first scoop. Poirot's gaze softened. You have trespassed most grievously upon both trust and privacy. Yet your motive was to feed your family, not to destroy Sir Reginald's memory. He tapped his cane. Nevertheless, you must restore the manuscript and prove your contrition. Flanders bowed. I will, monsieur. I shall return the parchment and deliver myself wholly to the Manor's service. Poirot nodded. Come, then, and let us retrieve the stolen draft. Celeste awaits, I know, in the morning room. You will deliver the draft to her by 8, no later. Together they returned to the east wing, where Mrs. Hudson admitted them. Celeste Montague sat by the fire in the morning room, her violet wrap pulled tightly. She glanced up at Flanders with a mixture of shock and relief as he bowed and extended a sealed packet of translucent sheets. I nearly ruined everything, he stammered. Forgive me. Celeste closed her eyes, then took the bundle. Thank you for returning it, but you must also hand over the original black-edged missive. Flanders withdrew the parchment with trembling hands and laid it upon the mantel. Poirot stepped forward, picking up both the draft and the letter. He inspected each one, then turned to Flanders. Madam, he nodded to Celeste, I release you both from further obligation. The Manor's future shall no longer be compromised by stolen words. Celeste offered a small smile. Let us never speak of this again. Mrs. Hudson prepared fresh coffee with cinnamon, a fragrant apology for the earlier deceit. As the aroma filled the room, Poirot sipped from his porcelain cup and regarded the assembled group. And now, the final reading may proceed without fear. For though secrets may be stolen by desperation, they are reclaimed by courage and by the little grey cells that guard them. At 9 that evening, the library doors opened wide for the concluding ceremony. Guests assembled. Lord Eversham, Celeste, Hastings, Dr. Lawson, Mr. Hadrill, in penitent attendance, James Fairchild, Lady Fairchild, and discreetly Flanders in sober humility. Poirot took the lectern, the scented quill poised above the final blank leaf of the memoir's crimson binding. He addressed the audience in measured tones. Tonight, we celebrate not only the memory of Sir Reginald Eversham, but the integrity of truth, which no black-edged letter, no purloined draft, no threat of scandal can extinguish. Let us hear the final words that bind scent to story forever. With that, Poirot dipped the quill into the jasmine oil and began to read, each syllable a testament to the triumph of honour over deceit, of heart over hunger, and of reason's gentle light over the darkest shadows of desperation. The words filled the library like a benediction, and as the last lines faded into silence, a solitary black-edged letter, a relic of treachery, was at last consigned to the hearth's fire, its menace consumed by flames. And so, under the watchful eyes of all, the midnight orchid mystery gave way to a new dawn of peace at Eversham Manor. Chapter 14. The invisible centre week had passed since the black-edged missive and the midnight orchid's theft, yet the tension at Eversham Manor remained palpable. In the morning light of a frost-crisp dawn, Captain Hastings found Hercule Poirot standing before the library's bound volumes, studying the blank final leaf of Sir Reginald's memoirs. The heavy glass doors remained shut behind them, locked to protect the manuscript from any further skullduggery. "Monsieur," Hastings ventured, "you appear troubled." Poirot's gaze did not shift. "Observe, Hastings, the final page, though blank to the eye, feels slightly indented, as though words were pressed upon it once, then erased." He drew a magnifying glass from his coat and examined the paper under the lamp's glow. "Look here, a faint grayscale residue. No, ordinary ink. This is invisible ink, slightly aromatic. Sir Reginald was wont to hide his deepest secrets beneath the surface." He placed a fingertip to his nostrils, inhaling. "A subtle note of leatherwood blossom mixed with musk." Hastings bent beside him. "Invisible ink, and scented, no less. The scented quill itself may have penned it." Poirot nodded, eyes bright. "We must reveal the hidden text. Fetch a lamp and a drop of methylated spirits, common reagent to recover iron gall residues." Hastings hurried away, returning with the materials. Poirot dipped a fine swab into the spirit and gently brushed it across the page. Within moments, pale grey letters emerged. "To those who seek the heart of my work, come at midnight to the Weeping Yew in the South Garden. There lies the final key to truth." He crumpled the leaves into his gloved fist. "Another summons, yet one more trap or treasure." Hastings retrieved his coat. "We go at once, then, lest someone elude us." Poirot's smile was wry. "And if our quarry anticipates our arrival, we shall be ready." At the stroke of 11 that night, the two sleuths left the warm lamplit corridors of the manor, slipping into the moonlit courtyard. The frost crunched beneath their boots as they crossed to the south garden, where the ancient yew tree stood sentinel over its sunken bed. Its drooping boughs, like a mournful veil, caught the lantern's beam in spectral patterns. "Here," Poirot breathed, kneeling beside a small iron grate set into the ground at the tree's roots. "Sir Reginald concealed a vault here, one I discovered years ago. The final key, perhaps, rests within." Hastings produced the scented quill, blade of the nib still tinted pale gold. Poirot sank onto one knee and slid the quill's nib into a tiny slot beside the grate. With a soft click, the cover eased open to reveal a narrow cavity lined with waxed cloth. Within, a small brass cylinder lay coiled in velvet. Hastings lifted it gingerly. "Monsieur, this must be it. Sir Reginald's last message." Poirot undid the latch and extracted the cylinder, placing it in his coat pocket. "Now, Hastings, let us depart before our presence is discovered." But as they turned, a figure emerged from the tree's shadow. A tall man in a long sable coat, velvet, collar turned high, and a top hat set at a rakish angle. He carried a slender walking cane in one hand, in the other a small vial of clear liquid. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he intoned, voice smooth as aged brandy. "So you have retrieved my prize." Hastings raised his lantern, revealing steel grey, eyes and a hawk-like profile. "You! Who are you?" Poirot rose slowly. "Reveal yourself." The stranger inclined his hat. "I am Carlo Bertoni, purveyor of rare essences, friend to Sir Reginald in our youth, and the true inventor of this invisible scented ink." He removed the hat, revealing a shock of white hair. "I taught Sir Reginald how to conceal his secrets within these pages, his greatest confidences entrusted to me." He flicked the vial. "But your meddling thwarts my plan. That cylinder contains a master formula for a perfume that orchestrates social power. With it, I gain dominion of the European fragrance market." Hastings stepped forward. "You will not have it, sir." Bertoni's lips curled. "Your little grey cells may have discovered the text, but they are no match for a lifetime of alchemical cunning." He raised the vial. "This, my friends, is Prussic-laced lavender distillate. Enough to finish you both." Poirot raised his cane. "Ah, but your bravado outweighs your logic, monsieur." He tapped the cylinder in his pocket. "Allow me to suggest you are too late and too exposed." In a flash, Hastings swung his lantern, spilling light across Bertoni's hands. He recoiled, dropping the vial, which shattered on the frozen ground, releasing a sour pall. Hastings seized Bertoni's elbow. "Drop the cane," he commanded. Poirot strode forward and tripped Bertoni's cane, sending it spinning across the frost. Bertoni staggered, exposed to the lantern's glare, and fell hard onto the gravel. As he struggled to rise, Poirot pressed a gloved hand to the cylinder. "You have been caught in your own perfumed trap." Bertoni glared. Then his shoulders sagged, realization dawning. "The quill, the invisible ink. You knew I would come here, and left the cylinder so carelessly." Poirot's expression was mild. "A true trap, but one I did not step into. I replaced the vial of Prussic-laced lavender with ordinary water when you were not watching, knowing that you would reveal yourself." He produced a small brass vial from his pocket, the real distillate, now seized as evidence. "Your downfall is not a blow to science, but a vengeance against secrecy misused." At that moment, Flanders hove into view, lantern raised, breath misting in the cold air. "Monsieur Poirot, Sir Reginald's vault key is missing." Poirot's eyebrow quirked. "It appears Bertoni removed it when he attempted to thwart us." He watched as Flanders bound the fallen perfumer in a length of rope. "Your career ends here, Monsieur Bertoni." Bertoni's head dropped. Hastings guided Poirot back to the mansion. Another puzzle solved, but at what cost? Poirot placed the cylinder upon the lectern. Truth, Hastings, is the finest fragrance of all. We recover these secrets not for profit, but to preserve the integrity of memory. He turned to Flanders. See that the vault is resealed. Only the rightful heirs may enter henceforth. Flanders bowed. As you wish, monsieur. Within the safety of the library, Poirot opened the brass cylinder. Inside lay a folded parchment, inscribed in invisible ink, that now glistened under the firelight's heat. He carefully unrolled it. Sir Reginald's final confession, acknowledging Bertoni's tutelage and revealing the composition of a perfume so sublime it would echo through generations, provided it be created with honesty. Celeste accepted, the parchment with reverent hands, tears in her eyes. Poirot closed the music box hinge and set the cylinder aside. At last, the entire legacy laid bare. He surveyed the assembled circle. Lord Eversham, Celeste, Hastings, Flanders, Dr. Lawson, James Fairchild, Lady Fairchild, and even the subdued Mr. Hadrell. My friends, we have seen secrets, hidden by ink and stolen by scent. Now, in the light of truth, let us honour Sir Reginald's memory with fidelity, and close this case of the scented quill forever. And with a final tap of his cane, Poirot restored the cylinder to its velvet-lined niche, sealing the Weeping Yew's vault and the invisible scent's secret within Eversham Manor's storied walls, never more to wander abroad. Chapter 15. The final bloom of truth. Warm glow of late afternoon sunlight filtered through the great mullioned windows of Eversham Manor's library, illuminating rows of leather-bound volumes and the familiar crimson volume of Sir Reginald's memoirs. At the centre, upon its lectern, rested the scented quill, its ebony shaft polished to a mirror sheen, and the brass cylinder of moonstone, once concealed beneath the Weeping Yew. Now, however, both relics lay untouched behind a protective glass case, their secrets shared at last with the world. Hercule Poirot stood before an assembly of familiarly resolved faces. Lord Eversham, his dignified countenance softened by relief, Celeste Montague, glowing with renewed purpose, Captain Hastings, ever loyal, Mrs. Hudson, restored in dignity, Flanders steadier in step, Dr. Lawson, with a physician's calm, James Fairchild, the repentant chemist, Lady Fairchild, measured in compassion, Mr. Hadrell, the humbled publisher, and even Carlo Bertoni, former mastermind, now contrite in exile. Each had played a part in the manifold intrigues. Each had stones cast, then stones placed to rebuild trust. Poirot raised his cane with ceremonious flourish. "Mes amis," he began, voice resonant, "today we witness the culmination of our journey, a tapestry woven of ink, perfume, and human frailty. From the forged, scented invitation to the invisible script, from stolen blossoms to the gas of desperation, we have chased every rogue fragrance and secret syllable to its source, and in doing so, we have safeguarded the memory of a remarkable man, Sir Reginald Eversham, and the legacy he entrusted to us." Lord Eversham rose, his slender frame seeming more resolute than ever. "My friends," he said, voice quavering with emotion, "I once feared that my father's tales would be tarnished by scandal or lost through greed. Yet through your efforts, Monsieur Poirot's unwavering logic, Captain Hastings's faithful courage, and the sacrifices of many among you, his memoirs stand whole, his elixir preserved, and his final confession secured. He paused to survey the company. I shall dedicate my life to honouring this legacy, to share my father's words with honesty, his fragrance with integrity, and his spirit with the generosity he so prized. Celeste Montague stepped forward, her fingers brushing the protective glass. "And I," she said, voice bright yet solemn, "as guardian of these treasures, vow to ensure that every recipe, every secret, and every page is used only to enrich lives, not to exploit fears or inflame ambitions. The scented quill shall remain safe here, under lock and heart alike." James Fairchild bowed his head. "I too have learned that knowledge, like fragrance, must be handled with care. Henceforth I offer my science only in open collaboration. No hidden experiments, no whispered formulas. The garden and the laboratory shall flourish together in honesty." Mr. Hadrell, wearing the humility of a man chastened by his own designs, cleared his throat. "And my publishing house will reproduce the memoirs only in full and without expurgation, binding each volume with a note of the truth that preceded its printing. I will champion integrity over sensationalism." Lady Fairchild placed a gentle hand upon his sleeve. "And we, as a family, shall welcome all who seek to learn, not to scandalize." She turned to Mrs. Hudson. "Your steadfast service has guided us through peril. You shall oversee the archives with honour, knowing your devotion to this house is repaid in trust." Mrs. Hudson's eyes glistened as she bowed. Dr. Lawson stepped forward. "I pledge my skill to this household's well-being, ready to heal both body and spirit whenever whispers of poison or grief arise." Flanders, the steward, added quietly, "And I will guard these doors and keys with vigilance anew, mindful of the lessons we have endured." Even Carlo Bertoni found his own place in this denouement. "I came to claim a formula, thinking that power through perfume would be mine," he said, voice low yet sincere. "But power gained by deceit is hollow. In exile, I will devote myself to genuine artistry, guided by the example of Sir Reginald and the lessons Monsieur Poirot has taught us all." Poirot inclined his head to Bertoni. "Each of us bears scars of this adventure, monsieur, but also the wisdom of its resolution. Remember that fragrance, like truth, need not be forced to emerge. It will bloom in the right moment, guided by the light of honour." As the gathering drew to a close, Celeste Montague retrieved a delicate crystal carafe from the sideboard. "Allow me," she said, pouring a small measure of the Eversham elixir into each of the crystal glasses set before them, "a final tasting, to celebrate the triumph of truth." The honey-gold liquid caught the firelight, shimmering like liquid dawn. Hastings raised his glass. "To Sir Reginald, and to the detective whose little grey cells outshine the brightest hopes and darkest fears." He drank deeply, closing his eyes at the rush of moonlit jasmine, and rose. One by one they sipped the elixir, and a hush fell, broken only by the soft sigh of contentment. Lord Eversham closed his eyes, remembering his father's laughter, Celeste's tears glowed like morning dew. Even Bertoni allowed a bittersweet smile, for in that moment the Eversham elixir fulfilled its promise. A fragrance that lingers beyond the fleeting, a memory that binds hearts across generations. Poirot stood apart, observing the circle of faces. He touched the plaque upon the desk's edge, inscribed with the date May 6, 1924, and whispered, "Thus the scented quill rests its tale complete." He closed his eyes for the briefest moment, savouring the elixir's last note, a triumphant chord of integrity. And so, as the candlelight waned and the first stars pricked the night sky, Eversham Manor exhaled its final secret. The scented quill's odyssey of ink and illusion, of blossoms and betrayal, of hidden chapters and invisible confessions, found its serene conclusion. What remained was the simple truth that honesty, like a rare perfume, carries the power to heal, to unite, and to endure beyond time itself. In the hush of that hallowed library, the last chapter was written not in ink, but in the hearts of all who witnessed it, and the world, rich with fragrance and story, was forever changed.